Assignment 0. Written by author G.K.Parks. Narrated by Amber Hinson. Original music created by Andre E. Leodore 3000. Modified by Amber Hinson. 1. Pounding out the last half mile, I was relieved to cross the finish line and immediately put my hands on my knees as I sucked in some air. My heartbeat reverberated in my ears, and if I didn't thoroughly stretch, walking tomorrow would be a challenge. It's about time. Michael Carver tossed a water bottle in my direction. As usual, you're still following my lead. I glared at him as I unscrewed the cap. How did you ever pass the physical regs? You run like a girl. I am a girl, and just because I can't run a 5-minute mile doesn't mean shit. Frankly, my 6.5 minutes are very respectable. You're just a freak of nature. Is that the argument you plan to use when you let a suspect get away? Carver could be an ass. During the last 5 months of training at Quantico, he had been the bane of my existence. Competitive, arrogant, a slight misogynistic streak, and always with the jibes. Thank God we get our field assignments tomorrow, I muttered. If I had to spend another 20 weeks, let alone 2 years, with you, I don't know what I'd do. Who are you kidding, Alexis? He grinned. You know exactly what would happen. He cocked an eyebrow up. Do you want to come over tonight? There's a chance we may never see one another again. We might as well go out with a bang. In your dreams. I finished stretching and found my keys. Let me know who your supervisor is so I can send a sympathy card. Being forced to spend 2 years with you qualifies as a violation of the Constitution. Not waiting for a response, I continued down the path to my apartment. It wasn't an apartment so much as a converted dorm room I had been assigned to share. The FBI and other law enforcement agencies used the Marine Corps base to conduct their own training programs, and I was relieved it was over. Although I had become close with Kate Hartley, my roommate, I preferred having a certain level of free will and privacy. Alexis Parker, she squealed and shoved an envelope in my direction as I walked in the door. What? It's our posting. They issued our assignments early. I'm working white-collar division. Big surprise, I teased. Kate had been a professional CPA for a few years before being recruited by someone at the bureau. She wasn't up to snuff for field work, barely managing to score high enough on the firearms proficiency test. But she could work magic with numbers and bank accounts. I put the unopened envelope on the table and found a change of clothes. I'm going to take a shower. Do you feel like going out tonight? She looked astonished. Of course. It's our last night. Everyone's meeting at the Blue Diamond later. I had meant dinner, not spending hours at a bar with a group of people who were tooting their own horns. Aren't you going to open it? She picked up the envelope and tried to hand it to me as I went past her on the way to the bathroom. Why? Do you think the courier is going to come back and resend it if I don't open it immediately? Smart ass. She looked annoyed and went into her room. The time alone was a nice reprieve. Having a chance to think about things was typically a benefit, but I was nervous. Maybe I was going to be sent across the country to Alaska, Utah, or somewhere equally small. I liked the anonymity a large city provided. The FBI offices in the bigger cities had more divisions, plentiful resources, and opportunity for promotion and growth. I shut the water and tried not to let Carver's constant digs get to me. The actual agents had all been impressed by my physical and mental acuity. Carver was just intimidated and jealous, I hoped. After dressing and giving myself a final word of encouragement, I went into the main room and tore open the envelope. I read and reread the words, looking for some clue as to whether or not this was a joke. Well? Kate asked impatiently. She was standing in her doorway, dressed in a cute outfit. Office of International Operations. I didn't know whether I should be excited or scared shitless. She stood behind me, reading over my shoulder. At least we're going to be working out of the same city. Until they decide to send me overseas. Sometimes I missed free will. She made a tisk sound and took the paper away. You have 0 military experience. You're a law school graduate, for God's sakes. And you don't speak Farsi, Arabic, or anything useful. Thanks. Sarcastic as always. It was nice some things never change. They do more than just fight the war on terrorism. Hell, we're all fighting the war on terrorism. But it doesn't mean you're going to the Middle East or anywhere overseas. They work a lot of the same cases Interpol does. Smuggling, forgeries, arms sales, etc. Wow. You just demoted me from operative to pencil pusher in 2 sentences. She narrowed her eyes. Do you even know what you want? Dinner, preferably now. Chuckling, she picked up her purse and met me at the door. After we ate, Kate insisted we go to the bar. We were sitting on a few stools in the center, chatting easily. She had knocked back 6 tequila shots in the last 2 hours, and I was only on my 2nd beer of the night. My life had taken many strange turns, and it was about to undergo another one. Everything in our government-provided apartment was packed, and tomorrow, I'd load up my car and drive to a new city to begin a new life. This was what I wanted, the one thing I had been striving for since I turned 20. I was 24 now, the minimum age required to become a special agent in charge. After working my ass off to complete my BA and pass the LSATs with flying colors, I received a scholarship to a decent law school with no intention of ever becoming a lawyer. It was just a stepping stone. Often, I was accused of being too serious. When I turned 18, my entire life changed. And after spending the first 2 years of college completely lost, I witnessed firsthand how useful law enforcement agencies could be and found my focus. After law school, I sent my application to the bureau, and by some miracle, they accepted me for training at Quantico. Parker, Carver called, sidling up to my bar stool. Drinking your sorrows away? What sorrows? Your misery over missing me. He sat on the empty stool next to mine and swiveled in his seat. Clearly, that's the best thing about this entire situation. I deadpanned. Kate turned to us. Michael! She smiled. Where did you get assigned? Los Angeles. He looked pleased. Alex is going to work for the OIO, and I'm assigned white collar out of the same office. The smug look left his face. Congratulations. He stood and picked up his glass. He leaned in and whispered in my ear. I'm going to finish this and head home. Feel free to join me. I snorted, and he walked away. You need to let loose sometimes, Kate commented, drawing my attention away from my to-do list for tomorrow. Michael's interested in you, and he's going to be 3,000 miles away. There's no reason you can't have some fun. The entire 5 months we've been here, you haven't brought anyone home, or stayed out all night. I'm not here to party. No. She swallowed the remainder of her shot. You always have to be the best. Practically perfect scores across the board on everything. All you do is work out, read, and study. You're avoiding living your life. It's almost like you're running away from something or someone. Drop it. I got up and put some cash on the bar. If you bring someone home, try to make sure he's gone by the time I get up. I don't want my final morning in our apartment to be awkward while I'm rushing around trying to pack my car. Sure. She didn't look convinced, but she had learned it wasn't worth arguing. Stubborn was one of the things I did best. The next morning, there were no strange men vying for bathroom time. Kate made a pot of coffee, and I filled my thermos and threw the few remaining unpacked items into a duffel bag. Alex. She just came up the steps from taking a box out to her car. It's been fun. That's one way to put it. I shrugged, hefting the bag over my shoulder. Give me a call whenever you get settled, and we'll go out for drinks to celebrate our new agent statuses. Sounds good. Kate had a home elsewhere, and it would be a couple of weeks before her lease was up. This gave her some time to apartment hunt. I was a nomad, having moved from a dorm to a campus apartment to a studio apartment in law school. Setting down permanent roots was something I had yet to do in my adult life, and I would have to put it off a little longer. Kate's position in white collar wasn't starting for another month. Unfortunately, Monday morning, I was expected to meet with my soon-to-be mentor, Mark Jablonski, and hit the ground running. Not all of us had cushy desk jobs, although the thought of only working behind a desk made me cringe. Sure, investigations were 90% pushing papers, but it was the 10% that made the rest worth it. Until I had some time to catch my breath, I could live out of a hotel room. I made reservations last night, and would stay in a weekly rental for the next few weeks while I apartment hunted, and cut my teeth at the OIO. After saying my goodbyes, I relished the 5-hour drive. It felt like freedom, and the ability to make a choice. Admittedly, nothing from the time I turned 18 until now felt much like a choice. It was all a string of theoretically good decisions in order to achieve a desired goal. Now that the goal was reached, things would be different. 2. Today wasn't going well. I sucked at interviews, and after spilling coffee on my blouse and having to find something else to wear, I was in a wrinkled, white button-up shirt with a black skirt, chunk heels, and my long, brown hair was tied back in a braid. My blazer must have been forgotten, or lost somewhere between Quantico and my hotel room because I couldn't find it, so there was no way to hide the wrinkles on the white linen. An assistant provided a temporary security ID and escorted me to the OIO floor. It was daunting. The expansive room was full of desks, offices, and people who knew exactly what they were doing, and why they were doing it. I waited outside an office door, listening as annoyed words were exchanged inside. Obviously, bad days were contagious. Eavesdropping was neither polite nor a great way to make a first impression. But from the bits and pieces of the conversation I couldn't help but overhear, I felt certain I was the topic being discussed. Her scores were off the charts. Expert marksmanship, superb physical ability, and near-perfect recall and deductive skills. The rest of the words were drowned out by a nearby ringing telephone. Another voice replied, "No one performs at these levels and doesn't crash and burn. I don't want to waste my time." "Do I have to make this in order?" the first voice threatened. "No, sir." A man who strongly resembled Director Kendall strode out of the office. He nodded in my general direction, but didn't make eye contact. "Parker," the same voice from inside the room barked. "Get your ass in here." "Sir?" I practically jumped out of the seat. It already felt like I had a lot to prove, especially since my training officer didn't want to train me. I stood up straight in front of his desk, waiting for something. The voice in my head mocked my militaristic posture, and commented that being at Quantico surrounded by jarheads potentially ruined my devil-may-care attitude. Mark Jablonski glanced up from perusing my file. He had light brown hair, and was in his mid-40s. Although he was dressed in a suit, it appeared he may have slept in it. At least my own disheveled appearance wouldn't be a point of contention for my new supervisor. "Sit down." "Yes, sir." I sat primly as he rifled through his bottom desk drawer and pulled out a stack of stapled papers. He passed them across the desk, along with a pen. "First, drop the yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. I can't stand that. In the office, it's Jablonski. Second, fill these out." "Okay." It was nice he wasn't quite so buttoned up. He continued to skim through my records as I attempted to answer the basic questions on the page. The problem was, although basic, things like permanent address were beyond my current capabilities. It was obvious Jablonski already regretted getting stuck with me, and not being able to do as he asked would just make the situation that much worse. I filled out what I could and turned the papers to face him. We sat in silence as he read my file and picked up the forms, checking that everything was properly filled out. "Address?" "I'm living out of a suitcase right now." He nodded and continued scanning the pages. "You left off your emergency contact." "I don't have one." He let out what might have been a growl, or maybe he was just clearing his throat. "Most of the time it's a spouse, parent, sibling. Come on, Parker, give me a name. Any name will do." "I can't." He stared at me, not bothering to hide the annoyance or frustration. "I'm not married. I don't have any family to speak of since the people who adopted me washed their hands the moment I turned 18. "Boyfriend? Girlfriend?" He softened slightly by my tale of woe, which I found irritating. I wondered which of us would be more aggravated by the time 5 o'clock rolled around. Not that it matters, but I'm straight and single. He let out a sigh and frowned. Snatching a pen from the cup on his desk, he scribbled something into the blank spaces. "Don't get yourself shot. I'll be your emergency contact. But under no circumstances are you to need
an emergency contact. Do I make myself clear?
Crystal. He leaned back in the chair and let out a chuckle.
Welcome to the OIO, Parker.
My first 6 months had flown by. I had found a one-bedroom apartment on the 6th floor of a decent enough building. It was a bit old and slightly run down, but it was in a safe neighborhood and within 45 minutes of work. Jablonski had warmed to my presence since our initial meeting, and although I had done little except shadow him and fulfill the other duties required of probationary agents, we were starting to find our rhythm.
Parker?
He barked, and I stood up from my desk and went into his office. Sir? I knew it irritated him when I said it, which was often why I did.
Cut the crap, and tell me everything you know about Victor Spillano.
Spillano owns and operates the winery and restaurant Specialty Vineyard. He's a wine collector and restaurateur. He's been suspected of importing and exporting black market weapons, namely military-grade assault rifles, small incendiary devices, and chemical components, which could be used in the manufacturing of larger explosives. Customs has flagged his shipments, but they have not discovered any contraband during their numerous checks. Although Specialty Vineyard often pays for private charter flights, none of those have been stopped by U.S. Customs or TSA because he fails to file proper flight plans. We missed them every time. Mark folded his hands over his stomach while he processed what I said.
Suggested course of action?
Continue surveillance, question employees, or perhaps place someone inside Specialty Vineyard to gain information on impending shipments. He nodded, encouraging me to continue. Without solid evidence or witness corroboration, everything we have is hearsay and not enough to get a search warrant signed. I concluded.
Very good.
He glanced at his watch.
How would you like to go to dinner? I'm thinking someplace with a great wine menu. Get home, change into something not work appropriate, and I'll pick you up in an hour and a half.
I've still got a dozen files to read and 3 to finalize.
You'd rather sit behind a desk than get out there and do the job?
He raised a questioning eyebrow.
What happened to the agent who was constantly nagging me for responsibility?
Fine, but you're picking up the tab.
God, you sound like my wife.
He smiled as I retreated from his office. After going home, changing into one of the few things I owned that was elegant and not at all work-centric, I curled my straight brown hair and applied copious amounts of makeup. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Mark stood outside, still dressed in his work attire.
Did I interrupt your hot date?
No. I stowed my gun and badge in my purse and ushered him out of my apartment before he could get comfortable or start commenting about my belongings still being stuffed inside boxes that I had never unpacked. Unpacking was something that took time and effort, and it could be done as needed. For example, the silverware was in the kitchen, as were the mugs. The actual plates and bowls were still packed because I subsisted off takeout and frozen entrees.
When was the last time you went on a date?
He asked as we drove across town. Since when is that any of your business, Jablonski?
Just some light conversation. I always did what I could to avoid having kids. Like getting divorced twice. But you're practically the daughter I never had. Especially since I'm old enough to be your father. I'd like to know you do something besides work all the damn time.
He was fishing, but I didn't know why.
In the last 2 months? Has there even been a single occasion when you've gone home earlier than I have?
Possibly. But the real answer was no. I spent most nights reading open case files, finalizing reports, and familiarizing myself with procedures and protocols.
Yeah, right.
He glanced at me from the corner of his eye. During the rest of the ride, he gave me instructions on the proper way of remaining unobtrusive. We were going out to eat. We weren't supposed to be federal agents, attempting to gain an inside view of a suspect's operation, or monitoring his conduct.
Just remember to follow my lead,
he said, handing the keys to the valet. Absolutely. 3. The service at Specialty Vineyard was excellent, and the food wasn't half bad either. My eyes roved the interior, gauging the layout, the patrons, and the staff. There was no sign of Spillano. He was probably apt at delegation. Why work when you could have someone else do it for you? Then again, there was the possibility he might be partaking in illegal activities and had to have unknowing third parties act as his proxy or cover for him.
Tell me what you see,
Jablonski instructed in a hushed tone. I ran through everything I observed, watching as the smile brightened on his face. He was constantly in teacher mode, which could be tedious and annoying.
So what do you make of the 2 guys sitting at the corner of the bar?
Observation 101. You don't turn around to look. Peripheral vision, reflective surfaces, and some creativity were necessary for inconspicuous surveillance. I turned to look out the window, catching a glimpse of the men. Unable to get a better angle, I dropped my fork and cautioned a glance behind me as I returned to an upright position. "What the hell is Carver doing here?" I whispered. Jablonski tried to look innocent, but amusement crinkled the corners of his eyes.
"We'll discuss that later, Alex. It's more of an outside matter."
He went back to eating, and I shook off the surprise. This was work. It wasn't an outing or event, but Carver's appearance meant Spilano was a much bigger fish than I imagined. After eating, I went to the ladies' room. It was an excellent excuse to snoop around the less accessible areas of the restaurant. However, there were no suspicious crates shoved in any abandoned corners labeled guns and bombs. That would have made my job easier, but I liked the challenge. Having nothing additional to report, I met Jablonski in the foyer, and we left the restaurant. We barely spoke until he stopped the car in the garage underneath the Ohio building. Work was only beginning for the evening, and I regretted not having a change of clothes with me.
"Practicality dictates always having a go-bag within reach,"
he chided.
"Think of this as one of Mark's life lessons."
I filed the thought away for later consideration. Right now, I was focused on Spilano, and the real reason we went to dinner. Why was Agent Carver at Specialty Vineyard? The last I heard, he was working out of Los Angeles.
"Michael Carver?"
Mark tried to play dumb, and failed miserably.
"Wasn't he at the academy with you?"
"Yes, sir." He sighed in exasperation.
"One of the few recruits who actually outperformed you, from what I recall."
I tried not to bristle at that dig.
"We're working together to bring down Spilano. The LA office confiscated a shipment of detonator cord. The sender claimed it was Spilano's, but they've had trouble pinpointing the connection. Since Victor is a resident and business owner in our fine city, they sent over their crack team to assist us."
He smiled, amused by some inside joke.
"Do you think you can play nice?"
"I always play nice."
"We'll see. It's harder than it looks when someone doesn't think you can find your own ass with both hands. It's work politics. We're on the same side. But they think they can do better."
"Maybe that's because you're so damn old and out of touch,"
I teased.
If we had been upstairs, I never would have said something so callous and insubordinate, but in the garage, I had some leeway.
"Watch it, Parker," he smiled. "If you start acting superior, I'll ship you out to LA with the rest of the arrogant lot."
We stepped into the elevator and made our way upstairs.
"All right, people," Jablonski announced. "Let's get down to business."
2 other agents remained in the office. He must have asked them to stay late. There was an analyst, another agent, and me.
"As you all know, we've been trying to get something to stick to Victor Spilano. Our associates from Los Angeles are here to assist."
I spotted Carver and the other man from the bar exiting the director's office.
"Agent Sam Boyle and Michael Carver will brief you on the situation."
Carver sauntered past, throwing a sly grin and a wink my way. So much for never having to see him ever again. Agent Boyle launched into an extensive briefing, complete with PowerPoint presentation and use of the smartboard. Victor Spilano had been in California on winery business a month ago. Surveillance footage showed him in Napa and other parts of California's wine country. None of these areas were close to Los Angeles, and I wondered why the LA office was involved. As if reading my mind, the images shifted to LAX airport. Cargo containers and manifests listed the same vineyard Spilano toured as the source of the contraband debt cords. After extensive questioning, Boyle continued, the vineyard owners claim these were not their shipments, but shipments made by Victor Spilano while on their property. Right now, we have nothing solid to link Spilano to these crates except for the word of the men we caught red-handed.
"Convenient and controversial,"
Carver interjected.
"We've been given some breathing room, but it's a short leash. The State Department wants this sorted quickly and quietly. Your investigation into the business practices and black market ties of Mr. Spilano will expedite our investigation. By sharing information and resources, we'll be able to get this bastard off the streets and out of the arms business."
It sounded like a steaming pile of shit. Carver was feeding us the company line, and I understood Mark's position on playing nice. The LA office wanted us to hand over months of hard work to make them look good.
"Any questions?"
Boyle asked, scanning the room.
"Just one."
Jablonski leaned against an empty desk.
"Who's taking lead?"
Boyle played the question off good-naturedly.
"Age before beauty, right? You have rank. Supervisory Special Agent. We'll assist your team. A bust is a bust, regardless of which coast makes it happen." "Wise move," Jablonski replied, immediately stepping away from the desk and taking point. "Tonight, I want all our records condensed. so we'll have one usable file for reference on our good buddy Victor. He pointed to the analyst and the other agent. The two of you work with Agent Boyle. After a chorus of affirmatives, the three agents headed into the nearest conference room. Rookies. He shifted his gaze from Carver to me. Or do you prefer the more appropriate term, probies? I prefer when you're not being cute, I muttered under my breath. Luckily, Mark didn't hear me. Sir? Carver questioned, waiting for whatever assignment we were about to be given as a child would wait to open a particularly large present on Christmas morning. The amusement on my supervisor's face was disconcerting. What do you have for us? You're both green, but you show exceptional promise. I've spoken to your supervisor, Boyle, and he assures me you can handle this. Carver looked about ready to burst in anticipation, but something about the entire situation caused an uneasy feeling to settle in the pit of my stomach. Whatever was about to happen, I already didn't like it. The two of you are going undercover. Without waiting for a response, Mark went into his office, pulled out 2 files, and returned. These are your cover identities and backgrounds. Make sure you have every bit of this memorized by tomorrow morning. Undercover work requires you to live and breathe being these people. Do what you have to in order to make me believe it.
Yes, sir.
We responded in unison. Mark tossed a keyring to Carver. Motorpool's lending you a vehicle for this op. Would you care to give Parker a ride home since I'm pulling an all-nighter with the boys? It would be my pleasure, Carver said. No, it will not. I needed to work on holding my tongue. Jablonski, I'd be more than happy to stay and assist on the paperwork. If you want to be useful, he was back in teacher mode, then you and your partner need to get used to working with one another. He's going to be the only one there if something goes sideways. He turned to Carver. That goes double for you, kid. We both remained silent, and Mark sighed. Get out of here and get to know your cover identities and each other. You need to be a believable couple by tomorrow. So Alex, stop cringing every time he gets within 5 feet of you. This isn't kindergarten. Boys don't have cooties. I wasn't sure about that, but if we were partnered together, it was time to act like a professional. No cooties here, Carver smiled, his nose crinkling playfully. Carver? Jablonski's tone had an edge. Unless absolutely necessary, don't get within 5 feet of Parker. She might shoot you. I laughed, and the two of us headed for the elevator. Look who's turned into a teacher's pet, Carver teased as the doors closed. And look who's still an ass-kisser, I responded. I don't think Jablonski needs to worry. We already act like a married couple. I rolled my eyes, hoping once we were alone, he would drop the macho attitude. 4. An opened pizza box with 2 slices remaining sat on my coffee table. I leaned back against the couch and rubbed my eyes. It was 2 a.m. If I had to read my cover profile one more time, I would go insane. How long have you lived here? Michael asked. We were both sitting on the floor. He was across the coffee table from me. 3 years. I moved in the summer after graduating from Boston University with a degree in art history. No, he smiled. Not the fake you. The real you. 4 months. Give or take. I'm just amazed. It looks even less lived in than the apartment at Quantico. Why the hell haven't you unpacked or at least hung a picture on the wall or something? Maybe put up some wallpaper or paint. Is Michael Price a home decorator? I asked, nudging his file with my index finger. No. He works at an art gallery, which is how we met. Then shut up. Classic Alex. He reached for one of the remaining slices. If you don't want to deal with it, you bark at it until it goes away. Are you part Doberman? Because I'm okay with a little biting. Unbelievable. Being tired made me irritable. All right, quiz me. I saw where his thoughts were going. On this, I pointed to the folders. Name. Alexander Riley, but I go by Alex. He nodded and gestured that I continue running through the phony background. We were supposed to be engaged. My art history background and Michael Price's position at the art gallery were how we met and supposedly fell in love. I was an up-and-coming artist, working at the gallery in the hopes of having my own show. While far-fetched, the manufactured background provided ample opportunity to interact with Victor Spilano. How long have we been together? I asked Michael, flipping the questions to him. Over a year. It was a year in. His eyes darted back and forth as he tried to remember. September. The 14th. No, 15th. I gave him a warning look. Come on. What's more believable than a guy not remembering the exact date of his anniversary? I'll give you that one. We continued going over our backgrounds for another hour. By then, the pizza was gone. I had every inch of my cover and Carver's memorized. I'm ready to call it a night. I tilted my neck to the side and rubbed the kink in my shoulder. Any objections? None. He looked tired, too. I'll see you in the morning, Alex. He got up, tossing the pizza box into my trash can on his way to the door. What do you call me? He asked as I closed the folders and wiped the crumbs off the table. What? I call you Alex. But what do I go by? Mike? Michael? Mikey? Sweetums? Jackass, my mind responded, and I hid my amusement. There was a chance I might be a bit insane, more so when I was tired. Whatever you want. Michael, or Sweetums. He winked. The second is only acceptable post-coital. I glared, and he let himself out of my apartment, flipping the lock on the way. The next morning, the four of us were uncomfortably situated in Jablonski's tiny office. Boyle and Jablonski looked exhausted. Neither of them had gone home, based on the clothing they wore. They made copies of the pertinent information from the file and distributed it to everyone working this case. Our team was small, consisting of 6 people. The analyst and other agent from last night had already gone home. They would deal with the paperwork and coordinate the operation between this office and the LA field office. At least I was free from the paperwork for once. Do you two have your covers established? Boyle asked, looking skeptical. Of course, Michael replied. I was mentally referring to him as Michael for the duration, just to avoid any accidental slips when we were in the field. Calling him Carver in front of Spillano would not be good. You really believe these 2 recruits can handle an operation of this magnitude? Boyle asked Jablonski. It was intentional, so we'd know to act particularly careful since we were already on thin ice. I can't speak for yours, but mine's shown a great deal of promise. I don't expect to be disappointed. He looked pointedly at me, as if to say, don't fuck up. Then I'm gonna catch some Z's. Boyle patted Michael on the back as he went out the door. Here's what's going to happen now. Jablonski turned his computer monitor to the side so we could see as he began explaining how things were going to work. There was a small art gallery near Specialty Vineyard. The owners were willing to cooperate with the Bureau, and they would corroborate Alexandra Riley and Michael Price's backgrounds. We were both going to be planted at the gallery and casually dine at Specialty Vineyard. At this point, the opportunities were endless. Question, Michael interjected. What excuse are we using to get close to Victor Spillano? Whatever works. This isn't the time for hand-holding. You get in, try something. If it doesn't work, you try something else. You keep trying until you find an end, and then you do whatever it takes not to lose it. Just remember, you cannot break cover. What if we encounter problems? I asked. Although months of training and study had dealt extensively with the proper methods to handle situations like this, words on a page were nothing like the real thing. Be creative. Jablonski pressed his lips together. Try to develop a shorthand between yourselves. If things go south, at least you'll have immediate backup. In the event it turns into something life or death, don't sacrifice yourselves. Pull the badge and make the call. Just make sure it's not premature. If something looks uncertain, hold out as long as you can to make sure it is what it appears to be. Got it. Michael glanced at me. We were a team for the duration. At least he understood we had to agree before making a move. It was the only way to safeguard the mission and ourselves. Excellent. Jablonski stood up. Let's get the 2 of you situated at the art gallery, so you can ease into your new identities. This ought to be fun. After all the instructions, Michael drove to the gallery, paintings and pinnings, and found a metered spot a couple blocks away. The owners, Sarah and Greg Silvar, were accommodating. They closed shop at lunchtime to give us a complete tour and an insider's view of how the art world worked. Greg had an art history degree and recommended some light reading to help sell my cover. It was almost dinner time when we left. I never realized the public was this amenable to law enforcement, Michael commented as we got back into the car. Maybe they were afraid we'd turn their information over to the IRS for a thorough audit, if they didn't play ball. As he listened to my rambling, he checked the mirrors and backed out of the parking spot. Jablonski wants us to ease our way into becoming regulars at Specialty Vineyard, so I guess we should check in, and then consider going to dinner. How old are we? He asked. The demeaning quality I often heard when we were going through training was back. I'm 24. You're 27? I couldn't remember the date of his cover's birthday, which probably meant spending so many late-night hours memorizing things had let some minute details slip past. I'd need to refresh myself on it again tonight, just to make sure it was ingrained in my being. Yes, and so is Michael Price. I wondered how deep cover agents kept things straight. It felt like we were suffering from dissociative identity disorders and had multiple personalities. That probably means we aren't in our 70s and hoping to cash in on the early bird specials, he said. Fine. We went back to the OIO building. I reread our falsified backgrounds twice, cover to cover, before going home to change. Michael was picking me up for our date this evening. Undercover assignment, here I come. I hoped no one would recognize us from last night. In the event they did, we'd need a decent cover story. And I had an idea. 5. Having learned my lesson the last time I went out in a dress, I had a tote bag packed with a change of clothes. Spending the night in the office was more conducive when I was in either work attire or something more casual, like jeans and a t-shirt. In the event the maitre d' or one of the wait staff noticed our repeat presences, I had a cover story prepared. Mark could be my father, which fit perfectly, since he often acted as a cross between a teacher and parent, and we had gone out for a nice meal. My fiancé was supposed to join us, but had to woo a potential art dealer instead, explaining why he and Boyle spent the evening at the bar. It sounded good on paper, and when I ran it by Michael, he agreed it was plausible. When we arrived at the restaurant, he turned on the charm, and I had no choice but to play along. The hostess seated us at a cozy table for two, and lit the candle in the center for additional ambiance. A moment later, the server arrived, and Michael made it some pretense of it being a special occasion. It was an excuse to order one of their finest bottles of wine. The man returned, presented the bottle, and poured a small sample into the glass. Michael swirled, sniffed, and did all the other pretentious things people do when pretending they know something about wine. After it met his approval, 2 glasses were poured, and we were left alone. "Honey," he purred, "aren't you having a good time? You need to relax. We aren't at work." Reading between the lines, I tried to appear more comfortable as I searched the room for Victor Spilano. "You are just as tense," I retorted, glancing at him. "Maybe you need to drink some wine." I wasn't entirely sure drinking on the job was permitted, but there was no other way to blend in when your mark was in the wine business. Michael picked up the glass and held it out, waiting for me to clink mine with his. Adorable. "I must be the luckiest guy, getting to date you." He sounded snarky. "What with all these smart alecky comments and everything?" "That's part of what made you fall head over heels in love with me. It's not my fault if I just swept you off your feet." He laughed and picked up the menu, pretending to read as he studied something behind me. I hated not being able to see whatever had caught his attention. My back faced the front door. All I had was a great view of the bar, and if I tilted a little to the side, I could see a sliver inside the kitchen. The server returned and took our orders. While we waited for him to return, Michael pulled out his cell phone. "Smile," he instructed, after he clicked a few photos. He passed the device to me. Victor Spilano was standing off to the side of the foyer, speaking with someone in a business suit. I had no idea who the other man was, but as I skimmed the photos, I found a few close-up shots that might be viable for facial recognition. Our meal arrived, and we ate, while Michael continued to keep tabs on the mark. Eventually, his gaze shifted to the side, and I was ecstatic to have something more useful to do than try to see some indecipherable reflection in the glass surfaces of the bar. Victor stood against a back wall, speaking with a group at the table. It appeared he was schmoozing with the regulars. After dinner, I ordered a dessert for us to share. Since Victor was in the building, we might as well hang around as long as possible. When the check was brought, Michael asked about catering and renting out the space for a private function. Within moments, Victor Spilano came to our table. He was unnaturally tanned, with nearly black hair, and a gauntness to him. "How was your meal?" he inquired, resembling a shark by showing tons of teeth. "Excellent." I smiled demurely, wondering which of us wore the pants in our pretend relationship. Since this was Michael's idea, I let him take lead. "Michael Price." He extended his hand. "This is Alex. We work just down the street at Paintings and Pinnings. Normally, we have events at the gallery catered by a local bistro, but there's a very impressive artist planning a show, and since this place is fantastic, we were wondering if it would be possible to rent your restaurant for an evening, or have you cater our function." "Mr. Price, you obviously have exquisite taste. I'm the owner, Victor Spilano." He motioned to the bartender, If you wait a moment, I'm sure I can scare up a price chart for our services. How many guests are you anticipating? Michael looked at me. It's invitation only. I tried to pretend I had some idea what was going on. It should be in the ballpark of 100, maybe 150. We can easily accommodate you, Spilano insisted. He went to the bar, and I looked at Michael. Flying by the seat of our pants on our first night conducting surveillance seemed like overkill. Were we pushing too hard? Would Victor become suspicious, or was I paranoid as usual? Michael gestured that I take it easy. When Spilano returned with a printed sheet of services and features, Michael skimmed it and smiled. Thank you so much. How much notice do you need? Normally, a month. But if you're in a bind, I can probably scrape something together in as little as 2 weeks. If I didn't know Spilano was an arms dealer, I might have liked him. We stood. Michael shook hands with Victor before putting his arm around my waist and escorting me to the door. As we stood outside, I could feel the unease of being watched. I cuddled up to Michael, unable to turn around to see who might be observing us. But it was best to sell ourselves as a couple. Michael kissed my temple and opened my car door, helping me inside as soon as the valet handed him the keys. That was fun, he said as we drove to the OIO building. I believe our first day undercover was a complete success. You pushed too hard. We're trying to blend in, not draw more attention to ourselves. The only thing we were supposed to do was get a feel for the place, not start party planning. It'll get us inside. Doesn't Jablonski ever let you call the shots? You never seemed particularly subservient at Quantico, so what the hell happened to you? This is our first outing. I don't want to blow it. I'm under strict orders not to get shot. Paranoid much? Screw you. That might help sell us as a couple. Do you ever take any of this shit seriously? You always talk a good game and throw out the jibes and the insults. But watching you tonight, I realize it's obvious you don't have any fucking idea what you're doing. I have a better understanding of this than you. Have you even been out of the office? Oh, and you have? I asked. Neither of us had had any experience with this type of assignment. We were getting into hot water, and I wondered how Jablonski and Boyle would react. But I didn't have to wonder long. After we turned the photos over to the analyst, Jablonski shut the 4 of us into his office.
What the hell are you doing?
Boyle yelled.
You were given basic instructions. What you did was premature, reckless. You shouldn't have made such an impact your first night out.
Sir, Michael began, an opportunity presented itself. There was no guarantee Spilano would be there any other night. For all any of us know, he might be going on vacation for the next 3 months. Boyle looked annoyed. So did Jablonski. It was a good call, I piped up, although I didn't necessarily agree. I understood the basic tenet of this job. Never throw your partner under a bus. Any suspicion could easily be mitigated. It isn't at all uncommon for the casual diner, looking to have an event catered, to ask for more information after enjoying a wonderful meal. We sold it from the beginning, from the wine to the dessert.
Now you're drinking on the job, too? You're federal agents. Why do you need to imbibe at work?
Jablonski asked. To sell our cover, we aren't impaired. Would it make you feel better if we submit to a breathalyzer or a blood test? I wouldn't back down. Maybe Michael made a dumb move, but we had to let it run its course.
Tenacious. Goddamn tenacious.
Jablonski sighed.
Fine. Fill out a report on everything you witnessed, and get out of here. Tomorrow morning, we'll have an official briefing prepared for your next course of action. And whatever we tell you to do, you better pay attention this time. Operations like this aren't concluded in a day. Undercover work is slow. You aren't going to make a case in an hour. Some agents go undercover for months, or longer. This is a marathon, not a sprint,
Boyle cautioned. Yes, sir. Michael and I responded in unison. We needed to stop doing that.
Parker,
Jablonski barked.
You wore that last night. Go buy some clothes to wear for working at the art gallery and going out on dates.
I nodded, and he jerked his head toward the door. We were dismissed. I picked up my change of clothes and went in search of the locker room. After returning, I took a seat at my desk and began writing my report. You didn't have to back me up in there, Michael said. I can take responsibility for my own actions. Stop being so impatient. I chided. We're in this together, and I don't want my ass handed to me again because of the next dumb thing you do. He finalized his report and picked it up to take it to Jablonski's office. See you tomorrow, Parker. Lucky me.
6. The next 3 weeks blurred into one monotonous day. Carver and I spent our fair share of time at Paintings and Pinnings, Specialty Vineyard, and work. It was beginning to wear on me. Undercover assignments were the pits. I hated paperwork, but constantly having to pretend to be someone else was just as tedious and soul-sucking. At least it was a learning experience. For future reference, if given the option, I wanted to work investigations, not gathering intel. It was Saturday morning. Jablonski had given us the weekend off to help maintain our sanity. I slept until noon, and after getting dressed, I went for a run. It was one of the few things that cleared my mind. When I returned from my 5 miles, I found Michael standing outside my door. "You're still running after something completely unobtainable?" he asked. "Don't you have a life?" "Yes, in Los Angeles. Until we get this sorted out, I'm stuck here." He followed me inside. "Plus, who are you to talk about a life? In the last 3 weeks, I don't believe you've unpacked a single box. Work is all you do. That's not much of a life." He went to my fridge and poured himself a glass of soda while I went into my room. "Running doesn't count as a life either. And you could have invited your fake fiancé along." "Why are you here?" I stood in the hallway between my bedroom and bathroom, wanting to take a shower and go about my day without all this bullshit. We were off for the weekend. That meant I shouldn't have to deal with him. "Boyle called. P&P is hosting an unplanned event tonight, and since we're supposed to be star employees, it would look suspicious if we weren't there. Their surveillance van on Spilano has noticed some odd movements, so our bosses think it'd be a good idea if we were in the vicinity." "But it's our day off," I protested. "Honey, we don't get days off. It's part of the job." "And you accuse me of not having a life." I shut the bathroom door. The novelty of being a federal agent was wearing thin. I'd been assigned to Jablonski for the last 7 months, and although I still had a lot to learn, getting dragged into a long-term undercover assignment had never been on my radar. The few times Mark and I had a quiet moment, he would try to instill upon me vast amounts of facts and information he thought new agents should know. He hadn't wanted anything this large-scale to rest on 2 newbies either. But we were determined to make lemonade. When I came out, Michael was on the phone. Rummaging through the fridge, I made a sandwich and sat at my kitchen table. He hung up and took a seat. "Another shipment's been confiscated. Boyle wants to end this. He's sending an invitation to the gallery's gala to Spilano. Although it's short notice, it will give Victor a better understanding of the type of service we expect from his business. So he should show up." "Why are we moving on him tonight? We already hired Spilano for the catering gig next week. While he's busy making sure the food prep and waiters are all prepared, we can snoop then." "In case you forgot, we were told not to do anything." Michael rolled his eyes. "So Jablonski's sending a few members of his team into the restaurant tonight. If Spilano's otherwise occupied, they might get a quick peek inside the back room of his restaurant. Whatever they find might be enough to tip his hand or catch him off guard." "I didn't think we had enough for a search warrant." "The rules have changed. A second source came forward and pointed the finger directly at Victor. The ink should be drying as we speak. Face it," Michael continued, "you don't even know what to do with a day off." I went for a run, and later, I planned to hit the range. "That's not a day off. That's self-imposed training. Let me guess. After that, you're going to curl up with a nice book or catch up on paperwork." Damn it, I hated how he guessed my routine. "Alex, we could have such fun together." He looks devilish. "But tonight, we're working. I'll meet you at the office, and we'll go to P&P together, okay?" "Fine." After dressing for an art opening and ensuring my go bag was in my trunk, I went to the OIO. There was no sign of Boyle or Carver, and I was relieved. I checked my email, skimmed through the latest developments on a few other open cases, and went in search of Jablonski. He was in his office. "Knock, knock," I announced from the doorway. He gestured me inside.
I'm glad the California boys aren't here right now.
He looked exhausted. A crumpled blanket sat on the couch, but I filed that thought away for later.
Parker, this isn't normally the type of assignment I'd send you on. This was meant to be information gathering only, but things have changed. You're in too deep or I'd pull you out.
What's changed? It wasn't that I didn't trust Michael, but he might not be aware of the current situation.
We are sending in a team of agents. We have a search warrant, but I don't expect to find anything damning. Spillano isn't an idiot. He isn't going to keep anything incriminating at work or home, which are the only two places we know to search. Instead, we're hoping to panic him. If he's afraid his illegal activities will be discovered, he might do something stupid.
So be on the lookout for stupid.
Bolos,
He joked.
The photograph of the man Carver took a few weeks ago pinged in Interpol's database. His name is Ivan Sarskov. He has peripheral ties to the Russian mafia. His family is known for dealing weapons to small groups in Chechnya, Baltics, and parts of the Mediterranean. We're working under the assumption he's buying from Spillano. Things aren't always what they appear. Keep your eyes open and your ear to the ground.
He blew out a breath.
Damn bureaucracy.
He cursed quietly.
Agents are raiding the restaurant tonight. We're hoping to get a look around without Spillano being there. But who knows how that will play out. Make sure you keep your cover intact. Don't do anything too ostentatious tonight. And keep Carver on a tight leash.
I wasn't aware there was a hierarchy regarding our undercover work.
Parker, it's my op, which means I'm putting you in charge of making sure Carver doesn't act recklessly.
Can I have a taser instead?
Get out of here.
I left the office and was in the midst of speaking to the analyst concerning Sarskov and Spillano when Michael appeared behind me in a snazzy suit. The analyst started over, and once the briefing concluded, we went downstairs to the garage and headed for the gallery. During the drive, I warned Michael to keep a lid on things and to do his best to blend in. How can I blend in when I'm dressed like this and with you on my arm? He attempted suave, but given the current pre-op jitters I couldn't shake, the compliment fell on deaf ears. We pretended to be in the know on all things art-related as we worked the party, doing our best to remain in one another's company most of the night. A guest had some questions on purchasing a particular photograph, and since I worked at P&P, I led him to one of the owners. By the time I returned, Michael was deep in conversation with Spillano. I hurried over, hoping it was nothing but casual conversation.
Alex, you look stunning.
Victor smiled and hugged me.
Your beau was just telling me you have yet to decide where to have your rehearsal dinner.
I smiled brightly, wanting nothing more than to knock some sense into Michael.
Honey,
Michael wrapped his arm tightly around my waist.
what do you think of having it at Specialty Vineyard? You absolutely raved about the food, and the restaurant is lovely.
So lovely. I smiled at Victor. Can you excuse us for just a moment? He nodded and turned back to gaze at the art. I dragged Michael into the next room and angrily whispered to him,
What the hell are you doing?
He started it. Just follow my lead. It'll be fine.
Without waiting for a response, Michael went back into the other room, leaving me no choice but to follow.
Well?
Spillano looked at us expectantly.
It's decided.
Michael put his arm around me and crushed me against his side.
It will be the third Thursday in April. We will still have a million other plans to make. Cake and flowers and linens. You know how women are.
He gave me a squeeze as if this was my idea.
But we can't live without them, can we?
I'd like to see you try. It was said in a kidding tone, but Michael got the point and backed off a little. Since it's still 3 months away, can we wait to decide menu choices? My mom's a vegetarian, and his sister is currently trying out veganism. We're hoping to get everyone to agree to chicken or beef by the time the wedding rolls around, but who knows how that's going to work.
No rush.
Spillano gave us a questioning look, and without permission, Michael leaned in and kissed me passionately. I was fighting the urge to shove him away when I heard Spillano quietly excuse himself. Making sure the coast was clear, I bit Michael's lip, and he stepped back.
Hey,
he exclaimed. I gave him my most lethal drop-dead look. Don't. This entire evening was going horribly wrong. Carver couldn't follow orders, and there was a chance Spillano might be getting suspicious. There was the even more frightening possibility that if we were still undercover in 3 months, we'd have to fake a rehearsal dinner. God, if I had to spend 3 more months with Michael Carver, one of us was going to resign. Hopefully, his personal constitution was pliable, or his pain threshold was low because I worked too hard to get here. The next hour was fine. Spillano worked the party, talking to the other guests and the owners. He discussed business, asking about the number of caterers, the liquor and wine choices, and whether they wanted to do a floating event next week that could begin at the restaurant and wind up at the gallery or vice versa. Just as I began to think Carver didn't sabotage the op and would be okay, Spilano took a call. He turned crimson and then blanched. Hanging up, he turned to the group he was speaking to and quickly extricated himself.
Is everything okay?
Michael asked him as he rushed past.
No, the FBI is raiding my restaurant.
7. After Spilano left, I dialed Jablonski and told him Victor was on his way. I was sure there would be the threat of lawsuits for harassment, and the usual rigmarole of protests that went along with search warrants. Sighing, I wasn't sure if we had to stay the rest of the night at P&P, or if we were free to go.
I can't believe you bit me,
Michael muttered. I took to leaning in a secluded corner of the gallery. What I wanted was to go back to the office and get started cataloging whatever evidence they might be collecting. But since I was stuck here, I wanted time alone to think. The warrant had been for weapons and shipping manifests. At the very least, we would be able to go through the restaurant's order forms for something sinister. You're lucky that's all I did. You try something again, and you'll have a new career as a soprano.
Feisty,
he remarked, positioning himself next to me. I did say I was okay with a little biting, but I never expected you to take it so literally. We stood silently as the party died down, and the remaining guests trickled out. When there was no reason left to stay, we went back to the office and didn't exchange a single word the rest of the night. As Jablonski predicted, the search was inconclusive. The records had been run and rerun, and although we cross-referenced them with alleged weapons trafficking, it seemed more hit or miss. There was something here. There had to be. Surveillance still had eyes on Spilano and his restaurant, but now that he'd been tipped off, he would be more cautious. At least he would if he had half a brain. Boyle was adamant that criminals always trip themselves up, and we'd catch him red-handed. This seemed to be an unrealistic pipe dream, but he had years of experience dictating otherwise.
Parker?
I looked up. The sun had risen without my noticing.
You're in early.
Kate commented on her way to the coffee pot.
Especially for a weekend.
I guess. I wasn't about to tell her I didn't go home last night. What are you doing here? I thought desk jockeys only work weekdays. It was part of the back and forth we exchanged whenever we ran into each other in the halls or elevator.
Tell that to my supervisor.
She continued on her way, but brilliance struck, and I called her back. Can you do me a favor? I held up the stack of shipping manifests. A few had account numbers listed. If you get a chance, run down these accounts. I explained the situation and how we obtained the information because I didn't want to risk tainting the investigation with any illegal actions.
Fine, but that means you owe me. And I'm cashing in the first night we both have off. Pub crawl, and you're buying, she smiled evilly. Until I find an attractive gentleman to foot the bill.
Maybe the research was true. Kate was in her 30s, and clearly at her sexual peak. I just wish she would grow out of this juvenile and semi-reckless behavior. A restaurant with a bar, and we'll split a bottle of wine.
Deal.
She copied the relevant account numbers and promised to call as soon as she had something solid. Getting up, I stretched. The office was a ghost town. It should be easy to sneak out and go home without anyone making a fuss. As I made my way toward the elevator, I spotted Mark's office door cracked open. What was he doing here on a Sunday? I went to the door, but stopped myself from knocking. Inside, he was asleep on the tiny couch in the corner. Tomorrow, I would give him hell for busting my chops, for working such crazy hours when he was clearly doing the same. Once home, I changed and crawled into bed. Everything I read blurred into a constant running thought, wisp in my brain, and there was no off switch. My brain was gnawing on something. It was nonstop and frustrating as hell. Eventually, I dragged myself out of bed and found a blank notepad. Starting at the beginning, I listed all the facts I knew to be true about Victor Spilano, Specialty Vineyard, and the confiscated weapons. The one piece that didn't fit was Sarskov. Why would one arms dealer have any interaction with another? It made no sense. Arms dealers weren't card-carrying members of an exclusive club, just like drug dealers didn't go to a weekly gathering to exchange sales advice. The only reason competitors would meet would be to make threats. The databases said Ivan Sarskov was a businessman. He owned half a dozen strip joints. His suspected ties to the Russian mafia were unsubstantiated, at least from a legal standpoint. The guy didn't have a jacket. He was clean, just like Spilano. The only difference was Sarskov's two brothers had been arrested for drugs, gambling, solicitation, and assault. Maybe being the black sheep in the family wasn't a bad thing. Either that, or Ivan had gotten all the brains and kept his illegal habits under wraps. My guess? He was running drugs and girls out of his clubs, maybe weapons too. I stopped writing and paced my apartment. Strip joints were petri dishes for crime, but Specialty Vineyard was an upscale restaurant. The facts didn't fit the accusations. What am I missing? I asked the empty room. No one answered, which was probably a good thing, because if I got an answer, that would mean I was certifiable. Why was an investigation ever opened on Victor Spilano anyway? Even before Boyle and Carver showed up, Jablonski sent Spilano's file across my desk. The investigation was in the works and had been for months, but no one told me what the impetus was. It never seemed important to ask until now.
Carver.
Michael answered on the second ring. What made Victor Spilano a person of interest?
He's selling and smuggling weapons. That violates dozens of federal and international laws.
Before he could continue with the history lesson, I interjected. Originally.
Huh?
He sounded puzzled.
Hang on.
I heard some papers being shuffled around.
Traces of plastic explosive were identified by TSA on one of his wine shipments 4 months ago.
Who was the seller? Could we have been wrong all along?
I don't know. It's in the official report. You mean to tell me you haven't memorized the entire thing by now?
Ha, ha. My mind raced. Everything I needed was at the office. The problem was, I also needed some help to access it. It was Sunday, and after the long hours the team had been putting in, I didn't think calling in an analyst was a good idea. I was still the newest agent, and somewhat of a joke since I had yet to complete a case.
You can't go through 4 months of research by yourself,
Michael said. Sure I can. I hung up, changed, and went back to the office. When I got there, Michael was sitting at my desk. 2 boxes full of files, surveillance photos, and documents were on the floor. He had the computer running a search as he leafed through the condensed file Boyle and Jablonski compiled at the beginning of the op.
Okay, so from what I've read, Spilano was questioned at the time his property was confiscated by TSA. As predicted, he claimed to possess no knowledge of explosives, C4 or otherwise. And since there were no actual weapons within the shipment, the items were returned to him, minus the packaging,
Michael said. I pulled up a chair and sat next to him.
We probably would have let it go, but less than a week later, Spilano traveled to Pakistan. He was gone for 2 weeks. According to his passport records, he went from Pakistan to India, then Dubai, Turkey, stopped at Greece, hit England, and then home.
Vacation?
He cited business for his reason to travel.
We lived in tumultuous times, and many of the places in the Middle East and even Eastern Europe were considered hotbeds for terrorism or other illegal activities. Even innocent travelers could come under scrutiny. The traces of explosive on his packing crates the week before had done nothing to alleviate his questionable travel itinerary. 1 + 1 = 2, right? What did Boyle say about all of this? I asked.
We were keeping tabs on Spilano for obvious reasons, and when we uncovered actual weapons, it was the first solid lead we had. That's when he found the files your division compiled, and we hopped a plane.
I rubbed my face. It just didn't feel right.
You seriously can't believe this guy is being set up,
Michael said. Something doesn't jibe. I pointed out the flaws in our reasoning, particularly concerning Sarskov, but Carver wasn't dissuaded.
Why did he rush out of P&P last night, if he isn't doing anything wrong?
I don't know.
What about the 2 separate parties who pointed us to Spilano? He was on their property, he used their resources to make shipments, and lo and behold, the shipments are nothing but contraband. But he's innocent. I forgot.
Michael huffed.
You've lost your damn mind.
He got up and slammed the chair against the desk. Did I ask for your help? His comments pissed me off. This is my gut instinct talking, so I'll react the way I see fit. You can get the hell out of here. I slid his chair out of my way and rolled in front of the computer, typing a search on Ivan Sarskov. Having reconsidered his options and blown off enough steam with his minor temper tantrum, Michael came back to the desk.
If you're right about this, I'm taking half the credit.
He scooted the chair back and opened the second box of files.
But if you're wrong, I'm not taking half the heat.
Son of a bitch. I caught his eye and winked. All of the benefits and none of the consequences. I wish I had a partner like yours. 8.
Don't tell me Parker's work ethic has rubbed off on the rest of the team.
Jablonski sighed as he walked up to my desk and stared at the scattered files and notes. She can be persuasive. Carver didn't bother to glance up from the computer. I didn't ask you to help. I dropped my pen on the paper and blinked a few times. My eyes were dry from spending so many hours reading. What are you doing here, Jablonski? He ignored my question and read over my shoulder.
Are you moonlighting for a defense attorney?
No, my answer was succinct, but he wanted some elaboration, so he nudged the back of my chair. Something doesn't feel right. Michael mumbled something derogatory about women and their intuition.
My office. Now.
Mark led the way and shut the door.
What do you mean it doesn't feel right?
Sarskov and Spilano, they don't fit. Not together. What if everything has been circumstantial, and Spilano's just been in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Jesus, Parker!
He rubbed the stubble on his chin.
We've had corroboration, evidence. Hell, we even had enough to get a search warrant. How can you start doubting the entire operation now? Why?
His volume increased with every syllable.
Are you spiraling into some kind of nervous breakdown? I thought you showed promise as an agent, but agents don't do this. You're wasting your time, Carver's time, and now my time. Get out!
But sir, it felt like I had just been punched in the gut. Why would one arms dealer be colluding with another?
Maybe they're debating territory. Maybe they want to join forces and open guns or us. Maybe they're best friends from college. Who cares? Your job is to investigate Victor Spilano.
He paused, his face red from yelling.
Actually, your job isn't even to investigate. It's to gather intel while undercover. How's that going? So far, I'm not sure you've brought anything worthwhile to my attention. It seems Carver has to make all the moves, doesn't he?
This is bullshit. I turned and walked out of Jablonski's office, not waiting to be dismissed. Michael glanced up, but remained speechless. Go home. I shook my head, trying to shake off the verbal barrage I just dealt with. Spilano's dirty. Our job is to nail scum to the wall, and he's scum. To his credit, Michael didn't waver. He remained at the computer, searching for additional information and connections between Sarskov and Spilano. Jablonski stayed in his office, likely fuming over my insubordination. I wasn't sure what to do. I was told to stop, but the little voice in my head said we were close to something. After my nerves regrouped, I continued at a faster pace than before, convinced any moment Mark would ask for my badge and resignation.
Oh my God. Alex!
Kate interrupted my thoughts as she ran down the hallway toward us.
Do you have any idea what you've stumbled upon?
What? Michael turned in his chair, and Jablonski came out of his office at the sound of Kate's commotion.
Agent Hartley.
Jablonski gave her a skeptical look.
Has Agent Parker dragged you into this cockamamie research project also?
Sir? Kate looked frightened to be spoken to in such a way by a superior. It's not, yes. She took a deep breath and started over. The spending in these accounts doesn't coincide with the purchases listed.
Which means?
Michael asked, giving her his full attention.
The records are falsified,
Jablonski said, shooting an "I told you so" look my way.
It speaks to Spilano's guilt.
No, she interjected, correcting herself quickly by adding, Sir, sit down and take it from the top. I kicked a chair toward her, and she sat. The list of transactions and authorized purchases don't line up. Although she was starting over, it still made no sense. These accounts belong to Victor Spilano, and from this purchase order, we can conclude Spilano made these purchases. But it's not physically possible that all the account activity was conducted by Spilano.
I'm sure he has assistants at the restaurant who can place orders.
Jablonski wasn't willing to give even an inch. Carver picked up the paper Kate dropped on the desk and read it, passing it to me as she continued to explain the situation. He's the victim of identity theft, I said aloud, dumbfounded. Kate put a finger on her nose and pointed at me, something that started as a joke back in our shared apartment.
You've got to be shitting me.
Jablonski grabbed the paper out of my hand and stormed to the elevator. The three of us exchanged looks. I wasn't about to follow someone who castigated me for conducting a proper investigation.
Does this change everything?
Carver asked. I looked to Hartley, hoping she could give us an answer. Numbers were a foreign language, and she was our translator.
It's possible.
She didn't sound convinced.
Were those purchases a principal component of the case?
No. Although Spilano might be the victim of identity theft, it didn't exonerate him from the weapons charges. 2 people pointed the finger at him for being responsible, and no amount of questionable purchase orders affected that fact.
Our criminal is also the victim of a crime. How ironic.
Michael chimed in, adding nothing useful.
Nice to see you again, Kate.
Likewise. I never expected to see the day when Carver and Parker would be working together.
I glanced at Michael, waiting for him to say something inappropriate or childish. Instead, he showed a level of restraint I didn't believe him capable of.
We got partnered together on this Spilano thing. It hasn't been so bad. She's just turned the whole case upside down, which means either she's a genius, or she's going to tank both our careers. Either way, it'll be one hell of a ride.
He nodded to me.
I'm gonna phone Boyle and ask what he thinks. Your boss doesn't agree with our supposition, but maybe mine will.
Thanks. He walked into a conference room and shut the door. I closed my eyes and tried to calm the panic away. Jablonski was furious. Kate's findings didn't reinforce my theory. All they did was throw a monkey wrench into the mix.
Are you okay, Alex?
Her voice interrupted my pity party. I've never done this before. Those 5 months at Quantico did nothing to prepare us for this. I've been here for 7 months, working under Jablonski, and just when I think I might be turning into an investigator, I bit my lip and took a breath. I might have sabotaged all of it.
You are being too hard on yourself.
Disobeying my supervisor's orders? Trying to find some reason why a dirtbag isn't dirty? Dragging you into it? I let out a sigh. I'd say I'm coming unhinged.
Cease and desist.
That's the problem. I can't.
Why not?
She stared at me, as if there was something seriously wrong, like I might have sprouted a 3rd arm. Do you ever feel like something is off, and it just keeps nagging at the corners of your mind until you figure it out? She nodded, but she looked confused. That's this case, I said. Michael came back into the room. From his expression, it was hard to determine if we just got support or a secondary chewing out.
He hung up. Jablonski just phoned.
The 3 of us sat in the office, studying the mountain of paperwork in the interim. The elevator dinged, and Jablonski came toward us. He looked more controlled.
Well, if Nancy Drew and the Hardy boys are done screwing around, we have to rework the entire case from the bottom up. Let's get to it.
9. By Monday evening, the powers that be still believed Victor Spilano was an arms dealer. This wasn't a court of law, so the general approach was guilty unless proven innocent. The forensic accountants, Kate included, were going over all purchases and charges with a fine-tooth comb. Since we didn't know exactly what we were dealing with, we were told to hold back on the assumption it might be identity theft. It was possible the out-of-state orders were being made by an unidentified accomplice or associate. We had no right to be privy to the inner business workings unless we had proof of their illegal nature. Nothing Kate discovered was illegal. Honestly, with the way Boyle reacted to the situation, I suspected he thought Kate was overzealous, just like me.
Come on.
Carver stood in front of my desk.
Let's get out of here.
Jablonski had shunned me since yesterday afternoon, and the whispers and looks I got from the other agents made my pariah status obvious. Don't stand too close. You might catch leprosy, I warned.
Alexis, turn off the computer. We have a dinner date.
Specialty Vineyard has been shut down since Saturday night.
But Michael Price and Alexandra Riley don't know that.
He grabbed the back of my chair and rolled me away from my desk.
You think people are talking about you now? Just see what happens when I throw you over my shoulder and carry you from the building.
You wouldn't dare. But instead of risking it, I stood and collected my belongings. Shall we meet there?
I'll pick you up at your place. In the event he spots us, 2 cars will look suspicious as hell.
The investigation was stalled. My hunch didn't pan out, and unless the accountants discovered something damning, the raid was a complete waste of time and resources. If anything, we were moving in reverse. Specialty Vineyard closed after the raid to avoid bad publicity, or so Spilano could put his affairs in order and get out of Dodge. I was kicking myself for failing to follow orders and for turning the investigation into a witch hunt. Perhaps I wasn't cut out for this job. After arriving at my apartment, I stared at my open closet. The clothes I was forced to buy for this operation hung inside, many with tags still attached, taunting my stupidity. There was a knock on the door, and I answered.
"You're going to need a jacket to hide the shoulder holster and badge,"
Michael remarked, entering my apartment. He was dressed in street clothes, a pair of jeans, and a button-up shirt, not the more sophisticated business attire I had grown accustomed to. Too bad we're all not lucky enough to conceal our credentials underneath an untucked shirt.
"Don't knock the shirt."
He was being playful. Nice, even. Am I getting fired? I asked, trying to figure out why he had the sudden change of heart.
"No. Am I?"
He smirked and sat on one of the stools at my counter. Retreating to my room, I changed into a dark pair of jeans and a black sweater. If he could do casual, so could I. Returning to the kitchen, I put my gun and badge in my purse. Did you get any additional instructions? Or are we just putting in an appearance and calling it a night? I asked.
"The latter."
He followed me to the door, locking it on the way out.
"You know, it's a lot more fun to best you when you are coming at me with your A game. Right now, everyone thinks I'm brilliant just for being stuck with you. Granted, that is a burden, but not to the extent people believe."
No response seemed pertinent, so I got in the car. Carver cast a glance my way every few minutes, but didn't speak. After he parked the car, he reached for my arm.
"None of us know what the fuck we're doing, so get over it. Do your job. And if you believe in something, don't back down."
Fine.
"I mean it. I want to kick your ass fair and square to prove once and for all your scores on the exams were a fluke. And not actually 2 points higher than mine."
Cocky bastard, I retorted, offering a grin.
There's my fiancée. I was beginning to wonder what happened to her."
He opened the car door.
"Come on, honey. It's time for dinner."
We strolled toward the restaurant, but as predicted, there was a notice on the front door. Specialty Vineyard was closed until Wednesday. On the bright side, it was Michael's gas and quarters that paid for this little venture. I turned back toward the car, and something caught my eye.
"What is it?"
he asked, once he noticed I was no longer next to him. I don't know. Veering off the sidewalk, I turned into the alley that ran along the side of the restaurant. The alley contained 2 dumpsters and not much else. It was narrow and culminated in a dead end. Something had caught the light and reflected it. Kneeling down next to a few wine crates beside the dumpster, I still couldn't determine what I saw.
"Alex."
Michael flipped the lid on the dumpster and peered inside.
"What do you make of this?"
I stood up and looked inside. It was brimming with packing materials, covered in Russian mailing labels and writing. My heart sank. Obviously, my insistence that 2 arms dealers couldn't be in cahoots was dead wrong. I turned away, and the same shiny glimmer caught my eye again. This time, I spotted the source. A single diamond on the concrete beside the crates. Now what did we stumble into? "Do we call it in?" I asked. After taking a photo of the diamond with my phone, I dug out a tissue and picked it up. I doubted it was large enough to provide a usable print, but since I was in hot water, every move I made had to be by the book.
"And say what? There are some suspicious-looking airmail stickers in the garbage outside the restaurant? For all we know, it's from the caviar,"
Michael said. I held up the diamond for him to examine.
"And someone lost the stone on her engagement ring."
He looked skeptical.
"Let's get out of here before we blow our cover. I'll swing by the OIO, and we'll give them the heads up."
Calling in a team to swarm the place wouldn't help my credibility, and it would compromise our fake identities. Slipping out of the alley as inconspicuously as possible, we went back to the car. There had to be more to the story. Russian shipping crates, diamonds on the ground, and weird purchases on Spilano's business account. Maybe it all added up to weapons dealing. We drove past the alley, and Michael turned down the next street. The restaurant was on the corner, and through the windows, we saw a few men inside.
"Is that Tsarskov?"
he asked. Maybe. It's hard to tell. Michael turned at the next corner and whipped the car around. "What are you doing?" I asked.
"Recon."
He turned and grinned.
"You in?"
"I'm already on thin ice. Might as well light a fire while I'm at it."
"You're mixing metaphors,"
he chastised. Finding a shadowed place on a side road with a decent view of Specialty Vineyard, he parked the car.
I say we stick around and see if anything happens. Anything solid might just be your redemption."
Glancing at him, I saw an unfamiliar determination. Maybe Carver was more than just an arrogant asshole. When the director's ripping into both of us, I promise not to throw you under the bus. It was the only consolation I could offer.
Noted.
He reached into the back seat and pulled out a camera case.
How illegal is it to photograph someone already under surveillance?
It was a debate from our academy days. He zoomed in, and we had a front row seat to the activities inside Specialty Vineyard. 10. 3 men were inside. From the way the other 2 bustled about, it was obvious Ivan Sarskov was in charge. However, there was no sign of Victor Spilano. Maybe he was in the back or out of view. Our angle only allowed us to view what was happening diagonally from the large middle windows.
"What do you think they're looking for?"
Michael asked, but I didn't have an answer. Maybe they're hungry. Who knows? I sighed. Where do you think Spilano is?
Out back? Counting diamonds or packing up a box of AKs?
He kidded, but it made me take pause. There was something to that statement. The gnawing in the recesses of my brain insisted. TSA recovered a box of detonator cord. There had been traces of explosive materials on the initial wine shipping box, but not a single firearm. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see something that wasn't there. We never found the actual explosives.
Shit.
He looked at me.
You think that's what the Three Stooges are searching for?
We both looked toward the restaurant, but the men had moved out of our line of sight. Assuming the diamond in the alley is part of the payment, I'd say whatever they are looking for is long gone. We continued to watch as figures crossed in front of the window. But whatever they were doing, it didn't appear they were making any headway. The same could be said for us. A car pulled up and parked illegally in front of a hydrant. Spilano got out and rushed inside. Even though I couldn't read lips, it was obvious heated words were exchanged. Spilano screamed at someone just out of view. Carver decided to try to get a better angle and got out of the car and headed across the street. Things were going from bad to worse. I kept my eyes on the restaurant as I unzipped my bag and removed my credentials and 9mm. I tucked my badge into my front pocket and my gun into the waistband at the small of my back, pulling my sweater down over both. It wouldn't be prudent to waste time looking for either if the situation required immediate action. Jablonski's words about not breaking cover echoed through my mind, and I hoped the jitteriness was a result of my probationary status and never having been in a situation like this before. Innately, I knew better. Getting out of the car, I looped around to a position on the opposite side of the street from Carver. He cast a glance my way and motioned me over. Since we were still undercover, we needed to act like it, especially out in the open. Although dusk had settled, and only the streetlights provided illumination, plenty of people and vehicles remained in the vicinity. It was imperative we act with finesse. No one else paid any heed to the closed restaurant. Clearly, our interest was already out of the ordinary.
Alex.
Michael tried to downplay his nerves, appearing macho and in control, but I noticed the tremor in his hands.
Any ideas?
We've got nothing concrete. Jablonski warned us not to blow it prematurely.
I've never had that problem. I don't want to start now.
Then we waited out. It was the right call, but it wasn't an easy one. The nearby bus stop provided a perfect angle to Specialty Vineyard and a feasible cover. We sat down, and Michael turned to face the restaurant, once again forcing me to lack a decent angle to watch what was happening. Thankfully, he still had the camera on, and he flipped the viewfinder around so I could watch on the screen as he scooted closer and caressed a strand of hair that framed my face. He whispered in my ear,
"Maybe you were right all along."
I kept my eyes on the camera screen as Sarskov stepped into view. Spilano cowered but refused to meet Sarskov's demands. The restaurateur gestured emphatically to the door. "Looks like a standoff," I muttered, as Michael pulled me into an embrace. His breath hitched, and I felt his sudden exhale against my neck, causing a chill to travel down my spine.
"Someone's called in reinforcements."
As he continued to watch, 3 car doors slammed in a chorus of impending doom. "How many?" I asked. They parked across the street from Specialty Vineyard and out of sight of the small screen I was monitoring.
3. I can't be positive, but I'd say one of them is Sarskov's brother, Sergei.
Do we wait? It was the only question on my mind.
The other two might be his enforcers.
Michael swallowed. Call for backup. I pulled away and looked him in the eye. Without further instructions, I was in charge, according to Jablonski. I just wondered if that still held true. I'm going to gather more information.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
Absolutely. Taking a deep breath, I stood up. Call it in, ask for advice, and wait for instructions. Striding across the street, I wanted to look like I belonged. Alexandra Riley was an employee of P&P and a constant frequenter at Specialty Vineyard. There was nothing abnormal about going to the restaurant and knocking on the door. I repeated this over and over as I approached the restaurant. Despite my attempt to remain in character, the pessimistic voice in my head explained the precise reason why two new agents were never partnered alone together. We had our training and muscle memory to rely on, but we lacked experience. Even though the front door was locked, there were enough people inside Specialty Vineyard for the casual observer to believe the restaurant might be open. First, I tried to push open the door. Then, I knocked and pressed my face against the glass. No one had any visible contraband, not even the two enforcers sitting in the back corner. Sarskov was standing in the middle of the room, talking to his brother, Sergei, while the other man whispered to Spilano in the opposite corner of the room. The original third man was nowhere to be seen. At the sound of my knocking, all eyes turned to me. I spotted Spilano and smiled, offering a slight wave. He came to the door, cracking it open, but not letting me inside.
Alex, we're closed.
He apologized, trying to force me away. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I just finished for the day and thought we could work on the menu for my rehearsal dinner. I hope to get started and surprise Michael. He should be along in a few minutes.
Another time.
Spilano stared into my eyes, and I saw fear and panic on his pasty and sweaty visage. He tried to pull the door closed. Are you okay? He tossed a nervous glance toward the men at the table. The other man, someone I recognized as an employee of Specialty Vineyard, came up behind Spilano.
It's fine. Why don't you stop by tomorrow afternoon, Miss Riley? And we'll take care of you then.
Okay, I offered him a friendly smile. I'll see you tomorrow. Heading down the street the way I came, I hoped Carver had been instructed on proper procedure in this situation. Leaving Spilano inside left a bad taste in my mouth. Regardless of who he was or what he had done, he was terrified. The lack of imminent danger would make a tactical breach premature and sacrifice our entire operation. But not reacting might lead to sacrificing our prime suspect. Surely, I wasn't supposed to worry about an arms dealer who could be plotting to kill potentially hundreds of people or selling to groups or individuals intent on mayhem, death, and destruction. My moral compass was so skewed I had no idea which was up. I rendezvoused with Carver, and he wrapped his arms around me and whispered in my ear.
Boyle's putting a tactical unit on standby. The surveillance team assigned to Spilano isn't here because they've been covering his house. Somehow, he eluded them, because, until I called, they thought he was home. Jablonski's on his way to determine the veracity of our claims, and take point.
I told Carver everything I witnessed. He went rigid and swallowed.
We're on our own until then.
I slipped out of his grip.
Let's split up and try to maintain eyes inside.
11. Carver was positioned near the alleyway. There was an alcove for a storefront close by, and he leaned against the far wall. I was at the bus stop, monitoring the movement inside the restaurant. Since we weren't prepared for this sort of operation, our only method for communicating was via cell phone.
Do you want to talk dirty?
Carver asked, letting out a nervous laugh. Sorry, but this isn't a 900 number, and you wouldn't be able to afford it if it was. Maintaining radio silence was SOP, but we didn't have radios. Also, despite his bravado, he was nervous. Hell, I was nervous. Rhetoric was one way to pretend we weren't unraveling at the seams. Even if I'd never admit it, I was happy to have the light banter cutting through the tension. How long do you think it'll take Jablonski to get here?
It's only been a few minutes. I'd say, depending on traffic, at least 20.
Traffic's a bitch. Carver chuckled at my comment, and we went silent as the men moved around.
After my brief interruption, Spilano was forced to take a seat at the bar, and he hadn't moved since. The two enforcers sat at the table, keeping tabs as the Sarskovs brothers did something out of my field of vision. The other man, the one who worked at Specialty Vineyard, was seated a few stools away from Spilano, and although his back was to me, it looked like he was in the midst of a conversation with Victor. You got eyes on Tweedledee and Tweedledum, my affectionate names for the enforcers.
Negative.
The waiting was torture. Carver's harsh exhales would cut the silence every now and again, but other than that, we were focused on the objective. Ivan emerged and barked something to the two goons at the table. One of them got up, grabbed Spilano by the collar, and shoved him toward the back. The other goon grabbed Spilano's co-worker and dragged him out of view. Carver, they're heading your way. The muscle has Spilano and his co-worker.
They just exited into the alley,
he said. Casting a quick glance at Carver, I saw him edge closer.
What's happening inside?
The original man, who had been assisting Ivan Sarskov, opened the front door and went down the street. Without manpower or resources, I had no choice but to let him go. Hopefully, we'd be able to identify him later from the photographs taken. Only Ivan and Sergei remained inside Specialty Vineyard. I don't know. Someone just left, but the Russians are still inside. The streets were emptying. With the restaurant closed and the nearby shops having locked their doors a half hour ago, there was a severe lack of pedestrians. The dim light and the angle made it impossible for me to see into the alley, but I heard the scuffle. It occurred almost simultaneously with Sergei exiting the front door. He got into an SUV and drove away, leaving the two meatheads behind. Ivan strode through the restaurant and out the other side door and away from the impending fracas. The party was now completely in the alley. "Michael?" I asked. He hadn't said a word since I heard the noise in the alley. A cry of pain carried across the street, and fearing the worst, I reached for my gun and dashed into oncoming traffic.
Michael?
We need to move in before someone gets killed.
He dropped the call, leaving me hanging. I sprinted across the street and glanced both ways to make sure no one was coming back. Michael was several feet away from the alley and entered without waiting. I was half a block away when I heard the authoritarian announcement.
Federal agent, don't move.
Rushing to get to him, I slowed before hitting the opening. Leaning my back against the wall and wishing we had worn vests on this outing, I looked around the corner. One of the enforcers had Spilano pinned against a wall, clearly in the middle of knocking the shit out of him. The other brandished a gun and was in a standoff with Carver. The Specialty Vineyard employee was curled into the fetal position on the ground.
I said drop it,
Carver commanded. He held his badge in his left, and he placed his right on top, trying to steady his aim. The assailant with the gun snorted and smiled.
Do you believe this?
He asked his pal, who had yet to release Spilano.
Sir, drop the weapon,
Carver insisted. I took a step into the alley, using the brick wall as partial cover. The two thugs looked at us. Put the gun on the ground, and put your hands in the air, I ordered. The man with the gun smiled, tilting his head down and lowering his arm ever so slightly. Carver took half a step forward, and the goon brought his gun up to fire. It all happened in an instant, but Carver flinched, and I pulled the trigger. The gunshot reverberated in the enclosed space, and the man dropped the gun, clutching his chest as he sunk to the ground. His partner released Spilano and took off running.
You got him?
I shouted to Carver, who was finally moving again. The temporary paralysis had worn off, and he kicked the gun out of the wounded man's reach, pulling a pair of cuffs from his back pocket.
Go!
He yelled, but I was already in pursuit. Running as fast as my legs could carry me, I was gaining on the fleeing unsub. The adrenaline created a numbing haze, and I functioned solely on instinct. Turning a corner, I continued chasing after the man who was slowing down. In another block, after shoving my way through a crowd of pedestrians and shouting, "Federal agent!" on the way, I had him cornered.
I surrender.
He turned with his hands in the air. He had no choice. He had trapped himself on a dead-end street. On the ground! Hands behind your head! Lace your fingers together! Having to approach and physically cuff a man who only minutes earlier had assaulted Spilano was disconcerting, but thankfully, he didn't try anything.
You killed Boris,
he said, resigned to his own fate. His words hit hard, and I swallowed the bile that rose in my throat.
Don't shoot.
His accent was thick, but I understood why he surrendered. Don't give me a reason. I hauled him to his feet. We made it half a block when the government-issued vehicles, complete with sirens and flashing lights, pulled up.
Agent Parker,
Jablonski said, taking custody of my suspect.
Where's Carver? He called for backup.
Another agent shoved the handcuffed man into the back of the car as Mark ran after me. More sirens were on the way, and I spotted an ambulance. Mark radioed our location as we continued to the alley next to Specialty Vineyard. Michael! I gasped down some air, winded from anxiety and the run. Are you okay? He nodded, and Jablonski shoved him away from the bleeding man. A second later, EMTs were on the scene, along with enough federal agents to make it look like they were casting extras for a new Men in Black movie.
Who fired?
Jablonski asked as the EMTs put the guy on a stretcher and loaded him into the back of the ambulance. I did. Mark confiscated my gun, sniffing it for the telltale scent of cordite. Carver was staring at me, and only when he grasped my arm did I realize I was trembling.
Are you both okay?
Jablonski asked.
Yes, sir,
Michael replied, but Mark looked at me uncertainly.
Are you all right to drive back to the OIO building?
He asked, and Michael nodded.
Take Parker with you. We're going to have a shit ton of paperwork to fill out. Incident reports, an internal investigation, psychological evaluations. Lots of fun stuff.
I wasn't sure if his tone was berating or simply matter of fact.
Get going. I'll see you at the office.
Michael led me out of the alley, but before we made it across the street, Mark called to us.
Make sure you're prepared to tell us exactly what happened tonight.
Under normal conditions, they would have separated me from Michael immediately. Apparently, Jablonski believed in bending the rules sometimes. We got into the car. The only thing I could concentrate on was the man bleeding on the ground. Boris. Did I kill a man named Boris tonight? Did he have a family? A real job besides beating people up? How did he end up in that alley, believing he could shoot his way out of the situation?
Alex,
Michael interrupted my thoughts.
thanks for having my back.
You hesitated. My words came out a whisper. You can't hesitate. I shut my eyes and curled up on the seat, facing the window. It isn't fair. I wanted to throw a dozen accusations at him. I wanted to blame him. But I held back. What's going to happen now?
It'll be okay. You didn't do anything wrong.
The unspoken implication hung in the air, but it didn't need to be said. As far as I was concerned, it never had to be said. Assigning blame wasn't going to change anything. 12. Michael touched my back, and I jumped, scrambling to get as far away as possible. It made no sense how it happened, but somewhere between Specialty Vineyard and the OIO building, I had fallen asleep. Passed out might have been a more accurate term. Fighting to get the seatbelt off, while pretending I didn't just react like a wounded animal, was nearly impossible. Before I even realized it, Mark was on the other side, opening my car door.
Adrenaline crash. It happens to all of us,
He said matter-of-factly.
It's a shock to your system to go from one extreme to another. Get a cup of coffee. It'll help level you out. We have a long night ahead of us.
Yes, sir. A couple agents escorted Carver away as Jablonski watched me pull myself together.
Most agents never have to pull their piece,
He began.
and an even smaller percentage actually have to fire on another human being. You have some shit-ass luck, Parker.
He led me toward the elevator.
I'm sorry, I have to welcome you to the club.
Hate to be here, I mumbled, swallowing carefully. I felt nauseous. The possibility of stomaching coffee seemed almost impossible. Did I kill him? Jablonski hit the elevator stop button and turned to me.
First, you never ask a question like that. We are not in the business of murder, so words like kill are negatively charged. Second,
I wondered if I was turning green because he softened.
he's at the hospital. When they brought him in, he was still alive. No reason to assume otherwise.
He hit the button for the elevator to resume.
And your file indicates you're an expert marksman. Obviously, you need more practice.
He winked and offered a genuine smile for the first time in days. Exiting onto the main level, I turned the diamond over as evidence, along with my phone. Everything else would rely heavily on my statement and Carver's.
Mark insisted I get cleaned up and changed. After flushing my stomach contents, changing into regulation attire, and rinsing my mouth in the sink, I pinned my hair into a tight bun and went to be debriefed by my fellow agents and write my report. Another all-nighter spent in the OIO building. This time, I actually was exhausted. The only thing I wanted to do was climb into bed, curl up under the covers, and vanish into thin air. After signing my report, I brought it into Mark's office. He was sitting on the couch, staring bleary-eyed at the mountain of paperwork before him.
You're out for the next 72 hours, while the shooting is put into perspective. I'll call with a verdict, but from what I've read so far, you have nothing to worry about.
Okay.
Spillano's in custody. His employee, Henry Rubin, is being held for questioning. Tech's running the diamond you found in the alley, and we issued bolos for Ivan and Sergei Sarskov. Whenever we determine who the other man is, we'll add him to the list. Dmitry Porchenkov, the man you arrested, is being interrogated as we speak.
Sounds good.
Are you gonna be okay?
Melting down in front of my supervisor was not professional, and never a good idea. Sure, why not?
Carver said you saved his life tonight. Around here, that counts for a hell of a lot. Sometimes, it's everything.
Remaining silent, I waited to be dismissed. It was about time I played by the rules.
You're a good agent, Parker. I'm sorry I doubted you,
Mark said. I went into the hallway. The morning shift had just arrived and was getting read in on what happened over the course of the night. Alex! Kate bounded up and hugged me. I heard what happened. Are you okay?
Fine.
I pulled out of her grasp.
I just want to go home.
She looked at her watch. Her purse was still on her shoulder. Come on, I'll take you. The next 72 hours was utter agony. The first 24 I spent in bed, barely moving unless absolutely necessary. But by Wednesday morning, the total stillness was replaced with the dire need to do something. Anything. I spent the remaining 48 hours of exile unpacking my boxes, organizing my apartment into a livable domicile, and running over a dozen miles on the treadmill. Regardless of what I did, I couldn't escape the sound of the gunshot, the blood, spreading across Boris's chest, or his friend telling me I killed him. For all I knew, he was alive, and if he wasn't, I didn't want to know. Granted, in a situation where it was him or me, there was only one obvious conclusion. Similarly, the situation was him or Carver, and still, there was just one clear-cut choice. It wasn't even a choice. It was a fact. The one thing I didn't understand was how Michael could hesitate. How could he not pull the trigger to save his own life? Some people signed up for this job with the misguided belief they were going to save people. I had never been one of those idealists, but ironically enough, it could be argued I saved Michael Carver. If only I believed it, maybe the shooting would have been that much easier to stomach.
Knock, knock,
Jablonski called from outside my apartment door. It was noon on Friday, and even though I was conflicted, I still wanted to get back to work. Obviously, there must be some loose wiring in my brain. Opening the door, he smiled.
Looks like you weathered the storm rather well.
It's all about survival, right?
That's my girl. Now get dressed. This isn't a vacation.
You could have called, I remarked, as I quickly got ready. Why does everyone keep insisting on picking me up?
The way you drive is frightening.
He deadpanned.
But more importantly, after work, you have an appointment you'd try to shirk if it weren't for your fearless leader showing you the way.
What?
It's a surprise. Mandatory, but still a surprise.
Not bothering to ask anything else, I let him drive to the OIO building. The fun was just beginning. Upon arrival, I was sent directly to Director Kendall's office. Boyle and Carver were already inside, and Mark grabbed an extra chair from the hallway before shutting the door. The four of us sat in a semicircle around Kendall's desk. He had yet to speak, and I knew we were moments away from an all-out barrage. It began with Jablonski and Boyle being dressed down for assigning 2 junior agents to monitor a volatile situation without backup or a senior agent to provide guidance. From the way the argument went, I was surprised neither of them was forced to relinquish their badges, although there was the threat of a demotion. No matter what kind of explanation Mark or Sam provided, Kendall wasn't buying it. Since things were already going this poorly, I was positive Michael and I would be reading the classified section of the newspaper by the end of the day, searching for a new career. When the director turned his tirade on us, I sat as still as a statue, steeling my nerves,
and determined to show no sign of emotion. Sometime during the yelling and screaming, his outburst stopped. Maybe I was experiencing a break from reality because it sounded like he was complimenting our quick thinking and dogged investigation tactics. What did everyone else write in their reports? My recollection of Monday evening didn't involve heroics and superior deductive reasoning skills, but rather a balls to the wall, fly by the seat of your pants, bend over and kiss your ass goodbye. Holy shit, we're so screwed. Retelling of the events. Agent Parker? Kendall asked, and I looked up from the spot on his desk I had been staring at since the yelling started. Are you listening? Yes, sir. I sat up straighter and made eye contact. We overstepped our position. No. He cast an angry glare at Boyle and Jablonski. You and Carver showed initiative. You discovered a key piece of evidence, and by interceding, you might have prevented Mr. Spilano from suffering a tragedy. You are both junior agents. He settled his gaze on the space between Carver and me. And you shouldn't have been expected to make that call, but you both exhibited a great deal of promise. You're dismissed. Carver stood, and I followed suit. It's nothing personal, but you're riding a desk for the next 2 weeks. Parker, you won't have your firearm returned until after you pass the psych eval and requalify. Yes, sir. We left the office, leaving Jablonski and Boyle to deal with the rest of the fallout alone. 13. In the last 3 days, the investigation had come a long way. The pile of paperwork on my desk promised another long night, but it was a welcome relief. This was what I spent years trying to achieve, and if it were over in just a matter of months, that would have been devastating. Starting at the top, I only cracked open the evidence file concerning the diamond and other items found in the alley before being summoned downstairs. Agent Parker. Dr. Wheeler stood and extended his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you. When the director said I had to undergo a psychological evaluation, I didn't realize it was happening today. Sure. I shook his hand and sat in the offered seat. The incident report and my personnel file sat on top of his desk. I assume this is in regards to Monday evening. Yes. He didn't say anything else. I had been through enough interrogation courses at Quantico to know what to expect. Silence was often enough pressure to force a suspect to open up. Needless to say, I remained tight-lipped. After a few minutes of listening to the whir of the white noise machine, he began again. Why did you want to become an agent? Why not? I shrugged. At this rate, we'd be here all day. Maybe I could get him to fast-track this whole thing. After all, I had a lot of paperwork to do. Government job provides great benefits, a certain level of job security, and preferential experience in the event I ever make the leap to the private sector. At least that was the argument Kate had made many nights in our apartment. Good. He picked up my personnel file. Is there a reason your emergency contact is Agent Jablonski? He's a federal agent. Seems like a decent choice for an emergency contact, don't you think? You're being evasive. I don't see what any of this has to do with getting my gun back and going back to work. So you just want me to sign this form and send you on your way? It was a trick question. I knew it, but I couldn't help myself. That would be great. He picked up the pen and held it over the paper. You ever shoot anyone before? No. Now you have. How's that? Any nightmares? Trouble sleeping? Images of the event? Reconsidering the things you did, and hoping it would change the outcome? I'm dealing with it. How? Alcohol? Drugs? Talking to someone about it? That explained the sudden interest in my emergency contact. Unpacking. I moved into an apartment, and I unpacked. This is where I am. This is my life, and where I belong. Okay. He signed the form and held it out. But you're going to stop by a few times in the next couple of weeks, and let me know how you're handling things. If it becomes too overbearing, we'll talk about it. He forced his card into my palm as I reached for the form. Fine. I snatched the paper and headed for the door. Parker, he called. Whatever it is you have outside the job, you need to use it as your fallback. It's the only way anyone remains sane when they're forced to do what you did. Mumbling some type of agreement, I was just happy to be free from the Jungian, Freudian, or other obscure psychological babble he might want to instill upon me. My desk upstairs was comforting. The paperwork was something I knew how to handle. A few hours later, I had familiarized myself with the evidence and who the current players were. I just picked up the transcript for Victor Spilano's interrogation when Mark came out of his office.
"It's 5 o'clock, he announced. "You're done for the rest of the weekend. Monday, you can catch up."
But I gestured to the stack of files. I'm just getting started.
"Monday,"
he insisted.
"Carver,"
He yelled across the room.
"finish up and meet us."
I gave Michael a confused look, and he smiled like a Cheshire cat. Are you planning to take me somewhere to kill me? I asked.
"No. Now let's go."
I don't drink tequila. I pushed the shot away. You know how they make that, don't you? Michael picked up the glass and downed it. Clearly, fermentation inside a worm didn't bother him.
"Fine. Anything you want."
Jablonski motioned the bartender over.
"Fair warning, if you order something girly, you will be teased mercilessly."
Belfast car bomb, I said. The bartender smiled and poured. Dropping the shot into the pint, I took a sip. Now, would you like to explain how this is a mandatory part of the job?
"You've been working your ass off. You went through hell Monday, and we've still got a lot of shit left to deal with concerning this investigation. Blow off some steam, get your head on straight, and Monday, we'll start over. Plus, I'm buying."
Well, when you put it that way. An hour later, there was the very strong possibility I was drunk. Not so drunk to do anything stupid, like take Carver home, but drunk enough that talking about the shooting seemed like a decent conversation topic. Carver was at the table, talking to a couple of agents who were regular frequenters at the bar. Only Mark and I sat alone at a corner booth. When my babbling on the shooting ebbed, he laughed.
"You got some brass balls, Alex."
He looked toward Carver's table to make sure he was out of earshot.
"I screwed up letting the two of you run things. It was stupid. Carver's green. Much greener than you. He got lucky."
Did Boris get lucky?
"He's still in the ICU. The docs think he'll pull through."
I blinked back tears. Drinking made me emotional. Damn Irish whiskey. Knowing a would-be killer was going to live shouldn't make me this happy, but the fact that I didn't kill someone made me overjoyed. I could go another day knowing I hadn't taken a life, justified or not.
"Another thing."
Mark motioned for another round, but I shook my head.
"You were right."
About? I spotted Kate in the corner, chatting up some attractive guy. I blinked, trying to remember what we were talking about.
"Spilano's not an arms dealer. I know you didn't get far enough into the transcripts, but apparently his business associate, Henry Rubin, cut a deal with Soskov. We have one hell of a mess to sort through."
So that's why people aren't treating me like a complete moron anymore. I slurred. It was time to go home. Good to know. Locating my phone, I dialed a cab. It would arrive in a few minutes, and I wanted nothing but to sleep off this entire week.
"I'll wait with you,"
Mark said. As I walked past Carver and his pals, he smiled. "To Alex." Michael held up a shot glass, and they drank. My guess was half of them didn't even know who I was. Then again, it probably didn't make a damn bit of difference. You know, you shouldn't ride me so hard about working late when you're camping out in your office day in and day out, I said to Jablonski. The cool breeze had a sobering effect, and since we were off duty, this might be the only opportunity I had to chastise my superior. You noticed. Hard to miss. Mark was quiet for a time as I waited for an explanation.
"My wife served me with divorce papers a week ago. Maybe it's had more of an impact on my job performance and professional relationships than I wanted to admit. Might be why I came down so hard on you when you brought up the possibility of Spilano's innocence. It's just so frustrating being wrong all the time."
I'm sorry. There wasn't much else to say. Smirking, I dug through my purse until I found Dr. Wheeler's card. Maybe you should talk to a professional.
God damn.
Mark burst into a contagious fit of laughter, and by the time the cab rolled up, we both had tears streaming down our faces. Stress and alcohol could cause some crazy side effects. As the cab drove away, I caught sight of him, wiping his eyes and snickering. We'd be just fine. 14. By Monday afternoon, my gun was returned. I no longer felt like an incompetent joke. Although I was still chained to a desk,
The investigation was taking off, and there was plenty to do. Victor Spilano requested protective custody until the lunatics who ransacked his restaurant were identified and captured. The last I heard, it was in an undisclosed location and guarded by a team of agents. Boris Romansky was still in the hospital under lock and key, and since it had been a week since the shooting, there was some teasing concerning my failure to use the proper double tap, or 3, to center mass firing methods. The guy was lucky I wasn't a stickler for rules, or he'd be 6 feet under. The second enforcer, Dmitry Porchenkov, sang like a canary. This was particularly easy to do when you didn't know a damn thing. The only thing we had on him was assault and destruction of property. He hadn't been armed and surrendered. It would be hard to get any serious charges to stick to him, and he'd been through the system enough times to realize it was best to give up whatever he had, cut a deal for a reduced sentence, and get the hell out as soon as possible. This left the still unidentified third man and the Sarskov brothers. The local PD was assisting in the search, but the Sarskovs weren't at any of the strip joints or in any of their usual hangouts. They had gone underground. A couple of agents from organized crime were meeting with their father to see if some type of arrangement could be reached, but blood was thicker than water. The only one left to break was Henry Rubin.
Mr. Rubin,
Jablonski began. We were inside one of the interrogation rooms, and Mark was taking point while I learned the finer skills of conducting a successful interview.
Things aren't looking so good for you.
Rubin's representation sat next to him, but neither said a word.
Selling explosives is a serious offense. It's even worse when you're involved in international trafficking.
Mark made a sound as if he were trying to suck something loose from between his teeth.
The way I see it, you're stuck holding the bag.
No one said anything as I leaned against the back wall, watching for micro-expressions or a shift in Rubin's eyes. He swallowed but didn't move. Maybe his hearing was impaired.
What proof do you have of my client's involvement?
The lawyer asked. Smiling, Jablonski lifted the case file off the table.
His fingerprint is on the diamond recovered from the alleyway. Did I mention it's the same alley where some hired guns almost killed 2 of my agents? By the way, those men are in custody now.
He let this fact sink in as he leaned his hip against the side of the table.
They're looking for a break and are willing to deal.
What can you promise me?
Rubin asked. This was the first time he looked up from the table.
Nothing until I know what you have to offer.
Mark was playing hardball, and the lawyer cast a stern look at Jablonski.
I would like to confer with my client alone.
That won't make him any less guilty,
Mark muttered, heading for the door. I opened it, and he walked through.
Are you paying attention, Parker?
He asked, as we went down the hallway in search of coffee. Yes, sir.
Then drop the sir.
He filled a mug and handed it to me as he reached for another one for himself.
His attorney is worried. Right now, he's probably asking what happened at the restaurant, who was there, and what exactly Rubin is involved with. At some point, a decision will be made based on his degree of involvement and how much damning evidence we might have.
Does this happen often?
Not as much as I'd like. Mostly, we get threats and suggestions to go screw ourselves.
Well, there's that.
Yup.
Jablonski glanced at his watch. Was Rubin more afraid of Ivan and Sergei than us? By the time I was down half a mug, the door to interrogation opened, and the agent posted outside gestured to Mark.
Now we see what's going to happen.
Back inside, Rubin tried to work out a deal. After some negotiation, he explained in vast detail how purchases made from the California vineyards had been altered on scene by a team of locals the Sarskovs hired. The team would intercept the crates in transit, switch casks of fermenting wine for a stockpile of weapons, detonator cords, and incendiary materials, and then replace the shipment before anyone was the wiser. Victor Spilano was a puppet. He had no idea what was going on. But when these disguised business ventures and profit margins were made so appealing by his business manager, Spilano had no choice but to sign the orders. He never knew what happened to the shipments because Rubin claimed they were shipping mishaps. The weapons shipped from California arrived by boat and were trucked to the locations, loaded up, and sent across country. Or at least that had been the plan before TSA confiscated the suspicious crates. Rubin insisted he didn't know who the source was overseas.
The Sarskovs had come to him with this proposition. For his trouble, he was given a percentage of the profits and told to keep his mouth shut. The latest payment had been in diamonds.
We need the rest of them.
Jablonski cast a look at Reuben.
Any idea where the Sarskovs might be?
Reuben shook his head emphatically. Even if he knew, he wouldn't say.
Want to tell me who the third guy is?
Again the head shake.
How about we try what the hell the three of you were looking for inside the restaurant?
That question caught Reuben unprepared. I saw the flash of fear in his eyes and the reflexive tightening of his jaw.
I don't know.
He lied. Mark let out a breath and came over to me. He whispered some orders and went back to the table. I left the room to tell Boyle to send a team to tear the place apart. Whatever they were looking for might still be there. By the time I returned, Reuben's lawyer was halfway down the hall, and Reuben was escorted back to a temporary holding cell. The OIO wasn't equipped for holding prisoners the same way a police station was, but we found some extra space just for him. "What happened?" I asked, as I fell into step beside Jablonski.
He said all he's going to. We need to find whatever they wanted, or we need to find them. My guess is there's one remaining shipment to uncover. Either it's somewhere in the vicinity of Specialty Vineyard, or it's still out there. Either way, we need to get it off the streets.
As the crime scene investigators tore Specialty Vineyard apart, I remained at the OIO building, researching every known fact about Reuben and the Russians. It sounded like a name for a rock band from the 60s. The discrepancies in the restaurant's financial records had been explained, and like I thought, Spillano was clean. Sure, he had been duped by his business manager, but being gullible wasn't a crime. Phoning his protection detail, I asked if they could question him again about the third man inside the restaurant. Upon our initial interview, he claimed he didn't know the man, but he had been flustered. Maybe having a couple of days to calm down jogged his memory. Boyle grabbed a chair and pulled it up to my desk.
Agent Parker, any progress?
None to report. The team's still at the restaurant, and I asked the guys to go over the facts with Spillano once more. I was out of ideas. Did you need me to do something, sir?
Would you mind going through the seizure information and see if there's something we missed?
Although posed as a question, it was not. Right away. Boxes of paperwork filled the conference room. Ivan and Sergei each had a box of their own that organized crime had sent over, and it took some time to find the proper documentation. Opening the jacket from the initial suspicious bust, I settled into the chair and rubbed my eyes. It was going to be another long night. 15. There was nothing to find. Boyle didn't need a federal agent to go over the records. He needed a magician to make evidence and leads appear out of thin air. Frustrated, I shoved the materials back into the box and stomped to the coffee maker. It was empty. Muttering about how others should follow proper etiquette, I poured the water in the top just as Carver came down the hallway.
Facial recognition got a hit on our third man from the footage we took Monday night,
he announced. Forgetting the coffee, I trailed him to Jablonski's office. Inside, Mark and Sam were reviewing the photos and information the crime scene unit found. Without standing on ceremony, Michael barged in to spread the good news. The third man was Vlad Yenisov. The name didn't ring any bells, so Jablonski picked up the phone to have the analyst run a full profile on the guy. Everything felt like it was falling into place. While we waited for Yenisov's file, the rest of the diamonds Ivan paid Reuben were delivered. Carver signed off on chain of custody and took them downstairs to get cataloged and run for additional trace elements that could be pertinent to furthering our investigation. It was getting late, and Jablonski had just ordered me to go home for the night. As I stood at my workstation, shutting down my computer, Vlad Yenisov exited the elevator in a dark suit. Standing next to him was Director Kendall, and the two were having a serious discussion. Stunned and unsure what to do, I gaped as Yenisov was shown to Jablonski's office.
Alex,
Michael said, and I jumped.
What are you staring at?
The third man. I jerked my chin to the closed door. He's in there.
We've brought him in already?
No, something was off. 10 minutes later, Kendall emerged and barked at us to get back to work. Technically, I should have left, but it was like watching a train wreck. We sat down, still staring at the door, until Yenisov exited and vanished behind the elevator doors. It was a scramble to beat Michael to Jablonski's office.
What just happened? I asked, standing in the doorway.
The third man works for Homeland Security, Boyle informed us, while Mark muttered expletives under his breath. Our search pinged in their database. He was a plant? Carver asked.
Yes.
Jablonski slammed the drawer closed so hard, the entire desk trembled.
This operation is officially over.
Again, it felt as if I'd been punched in the gut. Everything that happened was for nothing. Carver was almost killed, and I almost lost my job because of this. This steaming pile of bullshit.
How? We've got missing explosives, missing Russian gangsters, and a bag full of diamonds.
Michael babbled, but it was what we were all thinking. It was what I was thinking.
We're done,
Jablonski said.
Part of this job is knowing when to walk away, and we're fucking walking. Now go home, both of you.
There was no room for argument, and Carver and I backed out of the office. Inside the parking garage, Michael looked at me. We weren't satisfied with our orders.
Now what?
He asked. He held his car keys uncertainly. The right move would be to follow orders and let it go. Come over, I said, getting into my car and starting the engine without giving him time to ask a question or protest. Chinese food containers were strewn around my living room as we reconstructed all the facts we knew. Ivan and Sergei were responsible for smuggling weaponry into the United States. Ivan used Henry Rubin as his patsy and paid him handsomely in diamonds. I was sure the payment was just as illegal as the rest of the business, but the techs could worry about that detail. Rubin was perfect. As the business manager for Specialty Vineyard, he had access to the business's finances. Since Victor Spilano was a wine collector and traveled often in pursuit of his personal and professional love, Rubin figured he'd put all the blame on his partner. No one would have been the wiser if TSA hadn't gotten a hit on the explosive residue. Compounding this with Spilano's questionable travel itinerary, which raised yet another red flag. The only reason any part of the investigation ever came to fruition had been out of sheer luck.
Homeland oversees all law enforcement agencies and the infrastructure. It's part of the new world we've been living in for over a decade,
Michael surmised.
You know, this must be rough on Jablonski and Boyle. They were probably used to the old way of doing things and were forced to change. At least you and I don't know any better.
Clearly, we don't know any better, or we wouldn't be connecting the final dots to something that's over.
They never received the explosives,
Michael continued.
I'd wager that's what they were searching for in the restaurant. Maybe they figured the shipment had come in and was down in the wine cellar, or Spilano located it and wanted a cut of the illegal gains.
Yenisov was there to make it believable. My guess is Homeland already confiscated the missing shipment. Maybe they even put a stop to the international source. We could dig around in Interpol's files to look, I suggested, but thought better of it, and shook my head the instant the words left my lips. He stared off into the distance, not focusing on anything.
We'll never know, will we?
Probably not, but we did explain almost all of it. Michael, it doesn't matter if it's this assignment or our 100th assignment. We'll never really know what happens. We collect evidence, statements, maybe even surveillance tapes, but it's all supposition.
My God, you're cynical and jaded already.
But he didn't argue. Instead, he looked at his watch.
6 hours until we're back at work. Want to pull an all-nighter like we used to at Quantico?
No. I got up and stretched, listening to my bones pop. But you can crash on the couch if you want.
Thanks.
Just remember, I sleep with a loaded gun, so don't try anything. He laughed.
That's not surprising.
Pulling the extra pillow off my bed and a blanket from the linen closet, I brought them out to the couch. He had thrown the empty takeout containers into the garbage and put the leftovers in the fridge. He was amused by something, and I looked at him confused.
You know, it's not like your roommate is going to come home and stop us this time.
Nothing happened.
It almost did.
No, it really didn't. But if you want to keep up this crap, I will resend the offer to let you sleep on the couch. He pantomimed zipping his lip, and I went into my room, making a show of shutting the door. I was asleep the moment my head touched the pillow. These long hours were taking their toll. Thankfully, when I woke up, Michael had already left. The blanket was folded neatly, and the coffee was brewed. Arriving at work an hour later, Jablonski had left the file on my desk. We had to go over the final report. From what I read, and what Michael and I pieced together the night before, our deductions seemed accurate.
The only loose thread was the whereabouts of Ivan and Sergei Sarskov. I finished the paperwork and debrief and did my best to wash my hands of everything. During my first major assignment, I had shot a man and almost lost my job, and what did I have to show for it but a case that Homeland Security had taken possession of? On the bright side, Victor Spillano was cleared, and I no longer had to be Alexandra Riley, fiancée of Michael Price. Carver and Boyle were leaving tomorrow on an 8 a.m. flight for Los Angeles, and Jablonski would continue to mentor me in the fine art of being a federal agent. Hopefully, there would be no more major pitfalls or screw-ups. 16. A few days later, I stopped by Mark's office on my way out. It was one of the first nights I was leaving at a reasonable hour. There were no major cases that required additional man-hours, and I was trying to take the shrink's advice and forge some type of life outside the office. Kate and I were going out on the town tonight. "Hey," I knocked on the door jamb. "I'm heading home if there's nothing else."
"Come in and close the door."
Obeying his request, I sat down. Hopefully, I could catch Kate before she left since it looked like our plans were getting canceled.
"A guy over at Homeland told me the Sarskovs are in custody. The international arms dealing ring they were part of has been disbanded, and all the key players we know about are no longer a threat to national security."
The way he said it sounded like he was mimicking someone.
"I didn't tell you this, though."
"Tell me what?" I asked, smiling.
"Good."
He reached into his filing cabinet and pulled out a bottle of scotch and a glass.
"Shall we drink to a job well done?"
I spun the bottle. It was 50-year-old Macallan. "How can you afford this on a government salary?"
"A friend of mine sent it over as a coping mechanism for the divorce."
He looked glum.
"Instead, I think we should use it to celebrate."
He poured some into the glass and slid it across the desk to me. He then poured a few fingers into his coffee cup and put the bottle back into the filing cabinet. We clinked our cups and took a sip.
"Parker, you have something rare. You've got this natural instinct about things. It's something most agents learn, but you haven't been here long enough for that. We're lucky to have you."
"Thank you." I paused. "Sir?" Mark snorted.
"When we're drinking expensive scotch, it's Mark."
"Hell of a first assignment. Do most people end up with their first major case being taken away by another agency after they have to shoot a suspect in a dark alley?" I stopped. Jesus, I sound like a cheesy action flick. Mark laughed.
"Let's call this assignment 0. With any luck, your next one will be better, and that will count as the first."
I knew girls in high school that took a similar approach to losing their virginity. I'm not sure it works that way.
"We'll keep it quiet,"
he insisted.
"Now get out of here."
A couple of weeks later, another case presented itself. We were doing things by the book this time, so hopefully it would all pan out without any more undercover work, or another department taking over our investigation. As required, I saw Dr. Weiler a couple of times for the perfunctory and semi-hostile appointments. The verdict seemed unanimous. I was about as mentally stable as anyone else who wanted this type of career. There was a joint task force being formed between Interpol and the OIO, and I hoped Jablonski wasn't going to get us roped into it. It had something to do with illegal art sales. Worst case, I might score a free trip to Europe. But for now, I was happy to be in the city.
"Have you heard?"
Mark asked as I went into his office to have a requisition form signed. Please tell me we aren't traveling across the globe.
"No. Well, I don't know. But the director was exceptionally pleased by the work you and Agent Carver did. Despite the reprimands he cast upon Boyle and me, he thinks the 4 of us make a good team. He's extended them a permanent position at the OIO, although I don't think Sam has any desire to leave Los Angeles."
And suddenly, I'm much more open to the possibility of travel. He signed the form, and I went back to my desk. This was one hell of a life. This has been Assignment 0, written by g.k.parks. Narrated by Amber Hinson. Copyright 2014 by g.k.parks. Production copyright by g.k.parks.